The wind had teeth. That was the only way to describe it on nights like this, when the Wyoming winter turned vicious and the cold became a living thing that bit through wool and leather and skin. The kind of cold that killed cattle where they stood, froze water before it hit the ground, turned breath into ice crystals that hung in the air like shattered glass. Nathaniel Cross stood at the window of his study, one hand braced against the frame, the other holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched in an hour. Outside, the world had disappeared into white chaos. The blizzard had started at sundown and showed no signs of stopping. Somewhere out there, 300 head of cattle were huddled in the north pasture, and his men were scattered across 10,000 acres trying to keep them alive. He should have been out there with them. Instead, he was here, waiting for the latest mistake to arrive. Behind him, the fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows across walls lined with books he'd read and maps of land he owned. The house was massive, 14 rooms, imported furniture, a dining table that could seat 20. It was everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built from nothing. It was also a monument to his own stupidity. "Boss." The voice came from the doorway. Marcus Webb, his foreman, 20 years older than Nathaniel's 32, with a face like weathered granite and eyes that had seen too much. He'd been with Nathaniel since the beginning, back when the ranch was nothing but a dream and a claim deed. "She here yet?" Nathaniel didn't turn from the window. "No sign, but in this weather probably won't be until morning, if at all." Marcus stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You want my advice?" "Never stopped you before." "Send her back the minute she arrives. Don't even let her through the door." 23 times is enough, Nate. Town's starting to talk, saying you're cursed or cruel or... He trailed off. "Or what?" "Or maybe you don't want to be saved." Nathaniel finally turned. "I don't need saving." "Then why do you keep letting your aunt send these women?" It was a fair question. Nathaniel's aunt, Margaret Cross, lived in Boston and had made it her personal mission to see him properly settled. She had connections throughout the East Coast, wealthy families, social circles, networks of eligible daughters who needed husbands. For the past 2 years, she'd been sending them west, one after another, each with a letter of introduction and the promise of a prosperous match. 23 women, 23 failures. "Because refusing outright would mean admitting she's right," Nathaniel said. "That I'm too damaged to marry, too cold, too..." A sound cut through the howling wind. 3 sharp bells from the front gate, barely audible over the storm. Both men froze. "That can't be her," Marcus said. "Not in this. Not on foot." But Nathaniel was already moving, crossing to the gun cabinet and pulling out his rifle. Not because he expected danger, though trouble had a way of finding him, but because anyone traveling in this weather was either desperate or insane, and both made people unpredictable. They reached the front door together. Marcus grabbed a lantern while Nathaniel worked the bolt, chambering around. Then he pulled the door open, and the storm tried to rip it from his hands. The cold was immediate and absolute, a physical force that stole breath and burned exposed skin. Snow drove horizontally across the porch, piling in drifts against the railing. Beyond the circle of lantern light, the world was a roaring void. "There!" Marcus shouted, pointing. At first Nathaniel saw nothing. Then a shape emerged from the white, a figure moving toward the house with slow, deliberate steps, not stumbling, not running, walking, as if the blizzard was nothing more than an inconvenience. As the figure drew closer, details emerged. A woman, tall, wearing a long coat that was crusted with ice and a scarf wrapped around her face. No horse, no wagon, no supplies that Nathaniel could see, just her, alone in the storm. She reached the bottom of the porch steps and stopped, looking up at them with eyes that caught the lantern light and reflected it back like a wolf's. Then she unwound the scarf. She was younger than Nathaniel had expected, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her skull and skin so pale it was nearly translucent. But her face was strong, all sharp angles and firm lines, and her eyes were the gray of storm clouds. "Nathaniel Cross?" Her voice cut through the wind, clear and steady. "Who's asking?" "Eliza Hart." She didn't elaborate, didn't offer explanation, just stood there in the killing cold, waiting. "You're the one my aunt sent?" Nathaniel had to shout over the storm. "No." The answer surprised him. Then what are you doing at my gate in the middle of a blizzard? That's a conversation better had inside. She moved toward the steps. Nathaniel raised the rifle, not pointing it at her, but enough to make his meaning clear. I don't know you. I don't invite strangers into my home. She stopped, tilting her head slightly. Then I guess we'll have this conversation out here. Though I should warn you, what I have to say will take at least 20 minutes, and in this cold that means one of us will be dead before I finish. Try me. For a moment she just looked at him, really looked, as if measuring something she couldn't quite see. Then she smiled, and it was the most unexpected thing Nathaniel had seen all night. Not warm, not friendly, just amused. Your mother's name was Catherine, Eliza said. Catherine Cross, born Catherine Walsh in County Cork, Ireland. She married your father, Jonathan Cross, in 1855. They had 2 children, you and a daughter, who died at age 3. Your mother passed in 1869, your father in 1872. You inherited this land and built everything yourself. You've rejected 23 marriage prospects in 2 years. And 6 months ago, you received a letter from a lawyer in Denver about a woman named Sarah Mackenzie. The name hit Nathaniel like a fist to the chest. Marcus tensed beside him. Boss, let her in. Nate, you don't know. I said let her in. Nathaniel lowered the rifle, stepping back from the doorway. Before we all freeze to death. Eliza climbed the steps with the same deliberate care she'd used crossing the yard. As she passed into the lantern light, Nathaniel saw that her coat was military issue, worn and patched, and her boots were men's work boots, sizes too large. Everything about her spoke of poverty and practicality. Everything except her eyes, which spoke of something else entirely. She stepped into the house, and Marcus quickly shut the door, cutting off the wind. In the sudden silence, Nathaniel could hear water dripping from her coat onto the hardwood floor, the rasp of her breathing, the crackle of the fire in the next room. You're bleeding, Marcus said, pointing to her left hand. Eliza glanced down. Her fingers were wrapped in cloth that had once been white, but was now stained dark red. Frostbite. Started about an hour ago. How long have you been walking? Since noon. That's 8 hours. Marcus looked at Nathaniel, then back to her. In this storm? How are you even alive? Stubbornness. She began unwinding the cloth from her hand, revealing fingers that were white and waxy. And the fact that I grew up in Montana. This is Tuesday weather, where I'm from. Nathaniel found himself fighting the urge to smile. He lost. Montana? You're a long way from home. Aren't we all? She finished unwrapping her hand and held it up to the light, examining the damage with clinical detachment. I'll lose the tips of these 2 fingers, maybe the third if I'm unlucky. The rest will recover. There's a doctor in town. No doctors. The words came sharp and final. I don't need one, and I can't afford one. I can afford. I don't take charity, Mr. Cross. She met his eyes, and he saw something in them that made him reassess everything about her. Pride. Not the fragile pride of someone who'd never had anything, but the hard pride of someone who'd had everything and lost it. I pay my own way. Always have, always will. Marcus cleared his throat. I'll get bandages and hot water. Maybe some willow bark tea for the pain. Whiskey works better, Eliza said. We have that too. Marcus disappeared down the hall, leaving Nathaniel alone with this strange, half-frozen woman who'd appeared out of the storm knowing things she shouldn't know. Nathaniel gestured to the study. Come sit by the fire before you collapse. I don't collapse. Then come sit by the fire before I drag you there. Another one of those unexpected smiles. Now that I'd like to see. She walked past him into the study, moving with a slight limp he hadn't noticed before. When she reached the fireplace, she didn't immediately sit. Instead, she stood close to the flames, eyes closed, letting the heat wash over her. Ice melted from her coat in streams, pooling on the rug. Nathaniel closed the door and set his rifle against the desk. You mentioned Sarah Mackenzie. I did. How do you know that name? Because 6 months ago you received a letter from a lawyer named Thomas Brennan, informing you that Miss Mackenzie had died of cholera in Denver. The letter also mentioned that she'd been pregnant at the time of her death. The room seemed to tilt. Nathaniel gripped the edge of his desk, suddenly grateful he'd never touched that whiskey. Who told you this? Eliza opened her eyes and turned to face him. Miss Mackenzie did. Before she died, she hired me to deliver a message. What message? That she loved you, that she never blamed you for what happened, and that the child... She paused, something flickering across her face. The child died with her, a son. She'd planned to name him Jonathan, after your father. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathaniel had spent 6 months trying to forget that letter, trying to bury the guilt and grief and rage that came with it. Sarah had been, not a fiancée, but close, a possibility. Someone he'd met during a rare trip to Denver, someone who'd made him believe that maybe, just maybe, he could risk his heart again. Then she'd disappeared without explanation, and 3 months later the letter arrived. Why did she leave? The question came out rougher than he'd intended. If she was pregnant, why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she? Because of what happened with Emily. The second name was another blow, though Nathaniel had been expecting it this time. Emily. The first woman he'd ever loved, the first woman who'd ever destroyed him. Sarah knew about Emily? He asked. She knew enough. Enough to understand that you wouldn't believe her if she told you about the baby, that you'd think she was lying, trying to trap you the same way. Eliza stopped, seeming to choose her words carefully. The same way Emily tried to trap you. Emily didn't try. She succeeded. Nathaniel moved to the whiskey decanter, finally pouring himself a drink. Not because he wanted it, but because his hands needed something to do. She convinced me she was pregnant, convinced me to marry her. And 2 weeks after the wedding, her brother arrived with proof that the child was his, that she'd planned the whole thing to get access to my money. I know, Eliza said quietly. Sarah knew too. That's why she left. She didn't want you to think she was doing the same thing. So instead she died alone in Denver, pregnant with my child, because she thought I'd reject her. The glass cracked in Nathaniel's hand. He looked down, surprised to see blood welling from his palm. Perfect. That's just perfect. Marcus chose that moment to return with bandages and a basin of steaming water. He took one look at Nathaniel's bleeding hand and Eliza's frozen fingers and sighed. You two are a match set. You know that? He doesn't believe in doctors either, Eliza asked. He doesn't believe in anything that makes sense. Marcus set the basin on a small table and began laying out supplies. Sit down, both of you. Let's fix what we can. They sat, Nathaniel in his desk chair, Eliza in one of the leather armchairs by the fire. Marcus worked on her hand first, unwrapping the makeshift bandage completely and submerging her fingers in the warm water. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just watched the process with that same clinical detachment. You said Sarah hired you to deliver a message, Nathaniel said. 6 months ago. Why are you only showing up now? Because I've been in prison. Marcus's hands stilled. Nathaniel leaned forward. Prison? Women's Correctional Facility in Denver, 3 months. She met his eyes without shame or apology. I was arrested for assault. Who did you assault? A man who needed it. She pulled her hand from the water and examined her fingers. They'd turned from white to angry red, and the skin was beginning to blister. The tips are gone. I was right about that. Marcus made a disapproving sound and began wrapping her hand with clean bandages. What happened to the man? Broken jaw, broken ribs, concussion. She counted off the injuries on her good hand. And a lesson about keeping his hands to himself. Was it worth 3 months in prison? Nathaniel asked. It was worth 6 months. I got time off for good behavior. She watched Marcus work, her expression unreadable. And yes, Mr. Cross, it was worth it. There was a story there, a dark one, judging by the steel in her voice. But Nathaniel knew better than to push. Instead, he asked, what else did Sarah tell you? That she'd written you letters, 7 of them, 1 for each week she was pregnant before she got sick. She gave them to a friend to mail after she died, but Eliza trailed off. But what? But the friend ran off with them, sold them, probably, to someone who'd pay good money for ammunition against Nathaniel Cross. The pieces clicked into place. James Thornton. Marcus cursed softly. James Thornton, railroad magnate, political power broker, and the man who'd been trying to destroy Nathaniel's business for the past year. He wanted the land, wanted the water rights, wanted everything Nathaniel had built. And he wasn't particular about how he got it. If Thornton has those letters, Marcus said slowly, he could use them to ruin you. Paint you as the kind of man who abandons pregnant women, who... I know what he could do with them. Nathaniel stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the storm showed no signs of easing. The question is why he hasn't done it yet. Because he's waiting for the right moment, Eliza said. When you're vulnerable, when the damage will be maximum. And you know this how? Because I spent 2 weeks working for him before I figured out what kind of man he was. She accepted a cup of willow bark tea from Marcus with a nod of thanks. That's how I learned about the letters. He was bragging about them to his associates, about how he was going to use them to break you right when you were at your strongest. Nathaniel turned to look at her, really look at her this time. She sat in his chair, wrapped in bandages, drinking medicinal tea, looking like she'd walked through hell and decided it wasn't worth mentioning. A stranger who'd appeared in a blizzard with information that could save or destroy him. Too convenient. Too perfect. Why are you telling me this? He asked. What do you want? A job? A job. Room, board, and wages. Same as any of your ranch hands. She set down the teacup. I can ride, I can shoot, I can work cattle. I grew up on a ranch in Montana before my father lost everything. I know this life. And in exchange for this job, you'll what? Help me get the letters back? I'll help you survive what's coming, she corrected. Thornton doesn't just have letters, Mr. Cross. He has politicians, he has railroad money, and he has patience. He's been building a case against you for months. Tax fraud, water rights violations, intimidation of competitors. None of it's true, but that won't matter when he presents it to the territorial governor. Marcus swore again. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. How do you know all this? He asked. Because I was hired to help build it. She met his eyes steadily. Thornton needed someone who could go places his regular men couldn't, someone who could ask questions without raising suspicion. He thought because I was a woman, because I'd just gotten out of prison, I'd be grateful enough to do whatever he asked. But you weren't. I was desperate enough to consider it, she said honestly. Then I met him, watched how he treated his servants, his horses, his wife, listened to him talk about the people he'd destroyed and the people he planned to destroy. And I realized that working for him would cost me the only thing I have left. Which is? My ability to look at myself in a mirror. She stood, moving back toward the fire. So I stole his files on you, burned his evidence, and quit. Then I walked 8 hours through a blizzard to warn a man I've never met about an enemy he probably already knows about. You burned his evidence? Marcus looked horrified. Do you have any idea what Thornton will do when he finds out? Kill me, probably, or have me killed. He's not the kind of man who does his own dirty work. She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might comment on the weather. That's why I need to disappear for a while. And a ranch job in the middle of Wyoming winter, working for a man who never goes to town and never entertains visitors? That's about as disappeared as I can get. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Everything about this should have screamed trap. The convenient timing, the useful information, the vulnerable woman appearing at his door. It was exactly the kind of setup Emily would have engineered. But Emily had been soft where Eliza was hard. Emily had flattered and cajoled and played the victim. Eliza just stood there in her 2 large boots and blood-stained bandages, not asking for anything except a chance to work. If I give you this job, he said slowly, I need to know I can trust you. You can't. She turned to face him. You don't know me. I don't know you. Trust is something you build over time, not something you hand out to strangers in a storm. Then why should I let you stay? Because I'm useful. Because I know things about Thornton that could help you. And because... She paused, something flickering across her face again. Because Sarah asked me to look out for you. She said you were a good man trapped in a bad pattern, and that maybe all you needed was someone who didn't want anything from you except honesty. The words hit harder than they should have. Nathaniel looked away, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. There's a bunkhouse out back, Marcus said into the silence. But in this weather you'd freeze before you made it halfway there. We've got spare rooms upstairs. No. Nathaniel's voice came out sharper than he'd intended. The last thing he needed was another woman under his roof, especially one who looked at him like she could see straight through to the broken parts he'd spent years hiding. She can take the room off the kitchen, the one we use for women you're planning to send away, Eliza finished. I know, your aunt's last 3 prospects stayed there. They all left reviews. Despite everything, Nathaniel almost smiled. Reviews? The wallpaper is hideous, the bed is lumpy, and the window doesn't close all the way. But the lock on the door works, which is more important than comfort. She looked at him with those storm gray eyes. I'll take it. Marcus cleared his throat. I'll show you the way. Get you some dry clothes, and a crash from outside cut him off. The sound of breaking wood and animal screams. All 3 of them moved at once, Nathaniel grabbing his rifle, Marcus the lantern, Eliza. Nothing. She just ran, moving faster than her limp should have allowed. They burst through the front door into chaos. The storm had torn part of the stable roof free, and 3 horses were loose in the yard, panicking in the wind and snow. One of them, a young mare, had gotten tangled in fallen boards and was thrashing violently, screaming with each movement. Get ropes! Marcus was already moving toward the other 2 horses, trying to calm them with voice and gesture. Nathaniel started toward the mare, but Eliza was faster. She ran straight into the storm, ignoring the cold and the wind and the very real danger of getting kicked by a terrified animal. When she reached the mare, she didn't try to grab the rope or pull at the boards. Instead, she started singing. Nathaniel couldn't make out the words over the wind, but he recognized the tone, low and steady and somehow warm despite the freezing air. The mare's thrashing slowed. Eliza kept singing, moving closer inch by inch, her hands visible and empty. Then she was there, right next to the horse, still singing. She pressed her bandaged hand against the mare's neck and kept up that low, steady sound. The mare trembled, but stopped fighting. Now! Eliza shouted. Nathaniel didn't need to be told twice. He lunged forward and started pulling boards free, working as fast as he dared while Eliza kept the horse calm. Marcus joined him, and together they cleared enough debris for the mare to stand. The horse surged upward, nearly knocking Eliza over, but she kept her hand on the animal's neck, kept singing, and somehow, impossibly, the mare followed her through the storm to the intact section of stable. By the time they got all 3 horses secured and the worst of the debris cleared, Nathaniel was soaked through and shaking. Not from cold, though that was part of it, but from adrenaline and something else he couldn't quite name. He found Eliza in the stable, checking the mare's legs for injuries. Her coat was frozen solid, her lips were blue, and she was still singing that same low song. You could have been killed, he said. She didn't look up. So could you. I grew up with horses. I know what I'm doing. So did I. She ran her hands down the mare's foreleg, feeling for brakes. Montana, remember? I was riding before I could walk. That doesn't make you invincible. Neither does owning a ranch. She finished her examination and straightened, finally meeting his eyes. She's fine. Scared, bruised, but nothing broken. You were lucky. We were all lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. She moved past him toward the stable door. You keep your animals well-fed and well-trained. They trust you. That's why they didn't hurt anyone when they panicked. She was right, though Nathaniel wasn't sure how she'd figured it out so quickly. He followed her back to the house, where Marcus was waiting with more hot water and blankets. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen all year, Marcus said, wrapping a blanket around Eliza's shoulders. Probably both. She sat down hard on the bench by the door, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nathaniel saw the exhaustion in her face, the cracks in the armor. I need to sleep. Now, before I fall over. The room's ready, Marcus said. I put out dry clothes. They'll be too big, but better than what you're wearing. She nodded and stood, swaying slightly. Nathaniel caught her elbow without thinking. I'm fine, she said. You're about to collapse. I told you I know, you don't collapse. He kept his hand on her elbow anyway. But maybe just this once, you could accept help without it being charity. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Marcus led them through the house to the small room off the kitchen, the one they used for unwanted guests. Eliza had been right about the wallpaper, hideous, and the window, drafty, But Marcus had built up the fire and left out a thick wool nightgown and socks. "There's a lock on the inside of the door," Marcus said, pointing. "Use it. And if you need anything, I won't." But she said it without hostility, almost gently. "Thank you, both of you." Marcus left, closing the door behind him. Nathaniel stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of Eliza moving around the room, the creak of the bed as she sat down, the rustle of fabric as she changed clothes. "Mr. Cross?" Her voice came through the door. "Are you still there?" "Yes?" A pause. "That song I was singing, to the horse. What about it?" "My mother used to sing it to me when I was scared." Another pause, longer this time. "I haven't thought about it in years, but when I saw that mare panicking, it just came out." Nathaniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "Sarah was right about you," Eliza continued. "You are a good man trapped in a bad pattern. But I think maybe—" Her voice grew quieter, heavy with sleep. "Maybe you're starting to realize it." The lock clicked into place. Nathaniel stood there for another moment, listening to the storm outside and the silence from within. Then he turned and walked back to his study, where Marcus was waiting with a fresh bottle of whiskey and a knowing look. "You're going to let her stay," Marcus said. Not a question. "For now." Nathaniel poured 2 glasses. "Until I figure out what her real game is. And if there is no game, if she's exactly what she appears to be, a woman who made an enemy of the wrong man and needs a place to hide, then I'll deal with that when it happens." Marcus accepted his glass and raised it in a mock toast. 23 brides rejected, and the one woman who gets through your door is the one who didn't come here for you at all. There's some kind of poetry in that. "There's some kind of stupidity in it," Nathaniel corrected, but he smiled as he said it. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, the house settled into uneasy quiet. And in the small room off the kitchen, a woman who'd walked 8 hours through a blizzard finally slept, her bandaged hand curled under her cheek, her breathing slow and steady. She'd said trust was something you built over time. Nathaniel stood at his window, watching snow pile against the glass, and wondered if he had any idea how to build it anymore. Emily had shattered that ability, left him suspicious of every kindness and every smile. Sarah had tried to reach through the wreckage and died before he even knew she was there. Now Eliza, stranger, convict, savior, lay sleeping in his house, having proven her worth not with words, but with action. Not asking for anything except a chance. The whiskey burned going down. Nathaniel welcomed it. Tomorrow, he'd start asking the hard questions. Tomorrow, he'd investigate her story, check her claims, maybe even ride into town and see what he could learn about James Thornton's recent activities. Tomorrow, he'd be smart and careful and controlled. But tonight, as the storm tried to tear his world apart and a strange woman slept under his roof, Nathaniel Cross did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He let himself hope. Just a little. Just enough. Dawn came late and gray, the kind of winter morning that felt more like twilight. The storm had passed sometime before sunrise, leaving behind 3 feet of fresh snow and a silence so complete it seemed unnatural. Nathaniel stood in the stable, checking the horses one by one, looking for injuries they might have missed in last night's chaos. The young mare, the one Eliza had calmed, nickered softly when he approached her stall. He ran his hand along her neck, feeling for heat or swelling, and found nothing but healthy muscle and warm skin. "She's got good instincts." Nathaniel turned to find Marcus leaning against the stable door, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cold air. "The mare?" "The woman." Marcus handed him one of the cups. "Most people would have run from a panicking horse. She ran toward it. Most people have better survival instincts. Or less courage." Marcus took a long drink of his coffee, his breath fogging in the air. "I checked on her this morning, still asleep, dead to the world." Nathaniel felt something tighten in his chest. She walked 8 hours in a blizzard. Her body probably shut down the minute it felt safe. "You believe her story, then? About Thornton and the letters?" "I don't know what I believe." Nathaniel moved to the next stall, checking a gelding's water trough. "But I know Thornton's been circling for months, and I know that letter from the lawyer about Sarah felt wrong, too vague, too convenient. Like someone wanted me to know she was dead, but not enough to ask questions." You think Thornton had something to do with her death? No. Cholera doesn't discriminate, and Denver had an outbreak last summer. Nathaniel paused, remembering the letter, the clinical description of Sarah's final days. But I think he found out about her somehow, found out about the baby, and saw an opportunity. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do about the girl?" "She's not a girl. She's a woman who went to prison for assault and burned evidence belonging to one of the most powerful men in the territory." Nathaniel finished his coffee and set the cup on a shelf. "I'm going to watch her, see if her story holds up, and if it doesn't, you'll send her away like the other 23. Exactly. But even as he said it, Nathaniel knew it was a lie. The other 23 had been easy to dismiss. They'd wanted his money, his land, his name. They'd performed for him, calculated their smiles, said what they thought he wanted to hear. Eliza hadn't smiled, hadn't performed. She'd just told him the truth and then saved his horses. He found himself wondering what she'd look like in daylight, when she wasn't half frozen and exhausted. Then he caught himself wondering and felt a flash of anger at his own weakness. This was exactly how it had started with Emily. Small curiosities that grew into fascination, then obsession, then disaster. "I need to ride out to the north pasture," he said abruptly. "Check on the herd, see how many we lost in the storm. I'll saddle the horses." Marcus pushed off from the doorframe, then paused. "But Nate, whatever you decide about her, don't let Emily's ghost make the choice for you. That woman's been dead to you for 4 years. Don't give her any more power than she already took." He left before Nathaniel could respond. The ride to the north pasture took 2 hours through snow that came up to the horses' chests in places. Nathaniel brought 3 of his men, Marcus, Tom Chen, and a young hand named Billy, who'd only been on the ranch 6 months. They rode in silence, conserving energy, watching for weak ice and hidden obstacles. When they reached the pasture, Nathaniel's chest loosened with relief. The herd had survived, most of them clustered together near the windbreak he'd built last fall, the strongest animals forming a protective wall around the weaker ones. A few had frozen in the open, their bodies already stiff and covered with snow, but the losses were manageable. "Could have been worse," Tom said, pulling his scarf down from his face. He was 50, Chinese, and the best cattleman Nathaniel had ever known. "Much worse. That windbreak saved maybe 50 head. "We need to get them closer to the ranch," Nathaniel said. "Another storm like that and they won't survive. Moving 300 head through this snow will take days." "Then we start today." Nathaniel turned his horse. "Billy, ride back and get the rest of the men. Everyone who can sit a saddle. Tom, you and Marcus start cutting out the weakest animals. We'll move them in groups of 20. They worked until noon, cutting and sorting, moving the cattle with practiced efficiency. It was brutal work in the cold, the kind that left your muscles screaming and your hands numb even inside thick gloves. But it was also familiar, comforting in its way. This was what Nathaniel understood: physical labor, tangible problems, solutions that didn't require trust or vulnerability. He was helping Marcus separate a stubborn bull from the herd when he saw smoke rising from the ranch house, thin and gray against the white sky. "That's not from the kitchen chimney," Marcus said, following his gaze. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. "That's from the forge." They looked at each other. Then Nathaniel kicked his horse into a run. He reached the ranch at full gallop, sliding from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. The smoke was definitely coming from the forge, the small building behind the stable where they did metalwork and repairs. Nathaniel grabbed a shovel from the stable wall and ran. But when he burst through the forge door, ready to fight a fire, he found something else entirely. Eliza stood at the workbench, wearing men's work clothes that were rolled up at the sleeves and ankles, pumping the bellows with her good hand while holding a piece of metal in the flames with the other. Her dark hair was tied back with a piece of string, and her face was smudged with soot. She looked up when he entered, squinting through the smoke. "You're back early," she said. "I was hoping to finish before you noticed." Nathaniel lowered the shovel slowly. "Finish what?" Instead of answering, she pulled the metal from the flames, a piece of iron that glowed orange-red in the dim light. She moved to the anvil and began hammering it with quick, precise strikes, shaping it into something Nathaniel couldn't quite identify. He'd done enough metalwork to recognize skill when he saw it. Her strikes were confident, economical, hitting exactly where they needed to without wasted effort. When the metal cooled, she thrust it back into the flames and pumped the bellows again. "You know how to work a forge," he said. "My father was a blacksmith before he was a rancher." She didn't look away from the flames. "Taught me when I was 10. Said every person should know how to fix what breaks." "What are you making?" "Repairs." She pulled the metal out again and returned to the anvil. This time, Nathaniel could see what it was. A replacement hinge for the stable door, the one that had been broken for weeks. "I walked the property this morning. You've got a lot of small things that need fixing. Figured I'd start with what I could do without asking permission." Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Nathaniel, breathing hard from the run. He took in the scene and his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "She's making hinges," Nathaniel said, still not quite believing it. "I can see that." Marcus moved closer, watching Eliza work. "Those are good hinges." "They're adequate." She dunked the finished piece in the water barrel, and steam hissed into the air. "I'm out of practice, but they'll hold." She pulled the hinge from the water and set it on the bench to cool. Then she finally turned to face them fully, and Nathaniel saw that she looked better than she had last night. Still too thin, still marked with exhaustion, but her color was healthier and her eyes were clear. "I know you said I could work cattle," she said, "but I figure you'll need to see proof before you trust me with your herd. So I'm starting with this: small repairs, maintenance work, things you can check without risk." It was a smart move, Nathaniel had to admit. Trust but verify. Prove competence before asking for responsibility. "How's your hand?" he asked. She held up the bandaged fingers. "Hurts, but I can work through it. I've had worse." "The forge takes 2 hands." "I'm managing." "You're compensating." He crossed to the workbench and examined the hinge she'd made. The work was clean, the joints tight, the metal properly tempered. "This is good work. Better than good." But you're going to tear open those blisters if you keep at it all day." He set down the hinge and met her eyes. "Take a break. Let Marcus show you around the ranch properly. Then if you still want to make yourself useful, there's plenty that needs doing that won't destroy your hand." For a moment he thought she'd argue. Then she nodded and began banking the forge fire. "I'll show her the layout," Marcus said. "Maybe introduce her to the rest of the crew." "Not yet." Nathaniel surprised himself with the words. "I want to talk to her first. Alone." Marcus gave him a long look, then shrugged. "I'll be in the stable, checking those hinges we've been meaning to fix." He left, and suddenly the forge felt very small. Eliza wiped her hands on a rag, watching Nathaniel with that direct gaze that seemed to see more than it should. "You have questions." "I have a lot of questions." "Then ask them." Nathaniel leaned against the workbench, choosing his words carefully. "You said you worked for Thornton. How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. "And in that time you learned enough about his plans to know he's building a case against me?" "I learned enough to know he's obsessed with you." She set down the rag and turned to face him fully. "You're all he talks about, Mr. Cross. How you're standing in the way of progress. How you're too stubborn to see reason. How you need to be removed one way or another." "Removed?" "His word, not mine." She paused. "He talked about the letters, about how they proved you were exactly the kind of man the territory didn't need, someone who'd abandon a woman carrying his child. He thought it was perfect. Poetic, even." Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What else did he say?" "That once the letters went public, you'd have no choice but to sell. That the scandal would make you radioactive. No business partners, no credit, no allies. And once you were isolated..." She trailed off. "Once I was isolated, what?" He didn't say. But men like Thornton don't isolate their enemies just to watch them suffer. They isolate them to make them vulnerable. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nathaniel had known Thornton was dangerous. The man controlled half the railroad contracts in the territory and had politicians in his pocket from Cheyenne to Denver. But this level of planning, this patience, it spoke to something deeper than business rivalry. "Why does he want my land so badly?" Nathaniel asked. "It's good grazing, good water, but it's not irreplaceable. There are a dozen ranches he could buy with less fight." Because it's not about the land. Eliza moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered ranch. It's about the route. What route? The railroad route. The one Thornton's been planning for 3 years. She turned back to him. Your ranch sits right in the middle of it, right where he wants to put a major junction, the kind that would make this little corner of Wyoming into a real town, maybe even a city. Nathaniel's mind raced. He'd heard rumors about railroad expansion, of course, everyone had, but he'd assumed the routes would follow existing trails, established towns. How do you know this? He asked. I saw the maps in his office the day before I quit. She crossed her arms. He had them spread out on his desk, showing his partners where the track would run, and your ranch was circled in red ink, with a note that said acquisition target, priority 1. You're sure? I'm sure. She met his eyes. That's when I knew I had to get out. Because men like Thornton don't let priority 1 targets stand in their way. They remove them, however they have to. The forge had gone cold. Outside, Nathaniel could hear his men moving around, the sound of horses and distant voices. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But inside this small building, with this strange woman who'd appeared out of a storm, nothing felt safe anymore. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then I'm in more danger than I thought. And so are you, for stealing his files. I know. He'll send people after you. I know that too. Then why risk it? Why burn the evidence and run? You could have just walked away, kept your head down, disappeared. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. Because Sarah asked me to help you. And because... She paused, seeming to search for words. Because I'm tired of working for men who destroy things. I've done it before, followed orders, kept my mouth shut, pretended I didn't see what was happening, and every time I do it, I lose a piece of myself. She looked down at her bandaged hand. This, she said, flexing her damaged fingers, happened because I finally fought back, because I refused to be quiet one more time, and it cost me 3 months of my life in a cell that smelled like despair and rotting wood. She looked up at him. But you know what? It was worth it, because for the first time in years, I could look at myself and not feel ashamed. Nathaniel understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. He'd spent 4 years building walls, pushing people away, choosing safety over connection. And every time he sent another bride away, every time he chose solitude over risk, he felt the walls grow a little higher and his world grow a little smaller. If you stay here, he said, you'll be in danger. Thornton will figure out where you went eventually. Probably. And when he does, he'll come for both of us. Almost certainly. So why stay? Why not keep running? Canada's not that far. You could disappear, start over somewhere he'd never find you. She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and a little sad. Because running is easy, Mr. Cross, and I'm tired of doing easy things. Before Nathaniel could respond, the forge door banged open and Tom Chen burst in, his face tight with alarm. Boss, we've got riders coming. 4 of them, moving fast. Nathaniel was moving before Tom finished speaking, grabbing his rifle from where he'd left it in the stable. Marcus appeared with 2 more weapons, and together they moved to the front of the house. The riders were still a half-mile out, their horses dark against the white snow. But even at this distance, Nathaniel could see they weren't his men. You recognize them? Marcus asked, squinting through the distance. No, but they're not here for a social call. Nathaniel chambered around. Tom, get the men. Have them take positions around the property, but stay out of sight. I don't want to start a fight, but I want to be ready if one starts. Tom nodded and ran. Eliza had followed them from the forge, and now she stood at Nathaniel's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders. That's them, she said quietly. Them who? Thornton's men, the ones he uses for dirty work. She pointed to the lead rider. That's Jack Morrison. He's fast, mean, and doesn't ask questions. The one on his right is his brother Sam. I don't know the other 2, but if they're riding with the Morrisons, they're not here to talk. Nathaniel felt his grip tighten on the rifle. Get inside. No. Eliza, they know I'm here, or they wouldn't be coming. Hiding won't change that. She met his eyes. Besides, you might need me. For what? Translation. Morrison speaks in threats and violence. Someone needs to explain what he's actually saying. Before Nathaniel could argue, the riders reached the gate. They stopped there, just outside the property line, and the lead rider, Morrison, stood in his stirrups and shouted, "Nathaniel Cross! We need to have words!" Nathaniel stepped off the porch, keeping the rifle visible, but not raised. Marcus moved with him, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Eliza. "You're on my land," Nathaniel called back. "State your business or leave." Morrison smiled, the kind of smile that promised violence. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that looked like it had been broken and badly reset more than once. "I'm looking for something that belongs to my employer," he said. "A woman. Dark hair, tall, probably injured. Goes by the name Eliza Hart." "Never heard of her," Nathaniel said. "Really?" Morrison's smile widened. "That's funny, because we tracked her here. Through 8 miles of storm and snow. Her footprints led right to your front gate. The storm brought a lot of things to my gate, didn't mean I kept them all. See, that would be believable if you weren't the kind of man who takes in strays." Morrison gestured around the ranch. "Half the men working for you are drifters and outcasts, people with nowhere else to go. It's kind of your thing, Cross." It was true, and Nathaniel knew it. Over the years, he'd built a crew of men that other ranchers wouldn't touch. Men with checkered pasts, difficult personalities, or simply bad luck. Tom Chen had been run out of 3 towns for being Chinese before Nathaniel hired him. Marcus had been wanted for murder in Texas before a jury cleared him. Billy was an orphan no one else would take. Nathaniel had never seen it as charity. He'd seen it as pragmatism. Good men were hard to find, and he didn't much care about their histories as long as they did their work. But now that reputation was being used against him. "What I do on my land is my business," Nathaniel said. "Now state yours or get out." "My business is simple." Morrison swung down from his saddle, and his 3 companions did the same. "Mr. Thornton had some files go missing. Important files, and Miss Hart was the last person to see them." "Sounds like a problem between Thornton and this Hart woman." "It would be, except the files concerned you, details about your business dealings, your taxes, your water rights. Very interesting reading, actually." Nathaniel kept his face carefully neutral. "I've got nothing to hide." "Everyone's got something to hide, Cross. The question is whether you're hiding it alone or with help." Morrison took a step forward. "So, here's how this is going to work. You hand over Eliza Hart, along with any files she might have stolen, and we ride away peaceful. No trouble, no damage. Clean and simple. And if I don't have what you're looking for, then we search. Every building, every room, every bale of hay, and every barn." Morrison's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Mr. Thornton was very clear about how important this is. He's willing to be thorough." The threat was obvious. Nathaniel felt Marcus tense beside him, saw his men shifting positions in his peripheral vision. One word from him, and this would turn into a firefight. But before he could speak, Eliza stepped forward. "I'm right here, Morrison." Every gun on the property suddenly became very important. Nathaniel grabbed Eliza's arm, trying to pull her back, but she shook him off. "You want me? Fine. But let's not pretend this is about stolen files." She walked toward the gate, her limp more pronounced than it had been. "This is about the fact that I quit, that I saw what Thornton really is and decided I wanted no part of it." Morrison's smile faded. "You should have kept your mouth shut and your head down. Mr. Thornton doesn't like complications." "Mr. Thornton doesn't like being told no," Eliza corrected. "That's his real problem. He thinks money and power mean he owns everything and everyone, including me. He paid you good wages. He paid me wages to build lies about innocent people, to help him destroy a man who'd done nothing wrong except own land Thornton wants." She stopped just inside the gate, close enough that Morrison could have reached her if he'd tried. "So I burned his files and walked away. And if that makes me a complication, so be it." Morrison's hand tightened on his gun. "You're coming with us. Now." "No," Nathaniel said. The word came out harder than he'd intended, sharp and final. He moved to stand beside Eliza, the rifle no longer casual but ready. "She's my employee," he said. "Under my protection. You want her, you go through me." Morrison laughed. "You're willing to die for some woman you met yesterday?" I'm willing to defend my property and my people from men who show up making threats. Nathaniel's voice was cold. Now I've been patient because you work for Thornton and I don't want unnecessary trouble. But my patience has limits, and you're testing them. For a long moment, nobody moved. The 4 riders stood outside the gate, hands on weapons. Nathaniel and his men stood inside, equally armed, and Eliza stood between them, the spark that could ignite the whole powder keg. Then Morrison smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. All right, Cross, you want to play it this way? We'll play it this way. He swung back into his saddle. But you should know Mr. Thornton doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. You just made yourself an enemy of a very powerful man. I've had powerful enemies before, Nathaniel said. I'm still here. For now. Morrison gathered his reins. But winter's long, Cross. A lot can happen before spring. Accidents, fires, supplies that don't arrive. Men who decide they'd rather work somewhere safer. The threats were clear. Nathaniel felt anger surge through him, hot and sharp, but he kept his voice level. Get off my land! Morrison touched his hat in a mocking salute. Then he and his men turned their horses and rode away, disappearing back into the white landscape. Nobody spoke until they were out of sight. Then Marcus let out a long breath. Well, he said, that could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. Tom appeared from behind the stable, his rifle still in his hands. Those men mean business, boss. And Morrison's right about one thing. Winter's a dangerous time. A lot can happen. Nathaniel turned to Eliza. She stood very still, her face pale but composed. Inside, he said. Now. She didn't argue. They gathered in the study, Nathaniel, Eliza, Marcus, and Tom. Nathaniel poured whiskey for everyone except Eliza, who waved it away, and then he sat behind his desk and tried to organize his thoughts. All right, he said finally. Talk. Everything. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Eliza nodded and began. She told them about her arrest, about getting out of prison with nowhere to go and no prospects, about Thornton finding her, or having her found, and offering her work. How it had seemed legitimate at first, just research and filing, until she'd realized what the research was for. He's been planning this for months, she said, maybe years, building a case piece by piece, tax discrepancies that aren't really discrepancies, water rights violations based on misread maps, testimony from men he's paid to lie. Why go to all that trouble, Marcus asked. Why not just make me an offer? I'm a businessman. Everything's negotiable. Because you already said no, Eliza replied. 2 years ago, when Thornton first approached you about buying the ranch, you turned him down flat. Nathaniel remembered. It had been a good offer, generous even, but he'd built this place from nothing, and he wasn't ready to sell, not for any price. So he took it personally, Tom said. He takes everything personally. Eliza accepted a glass of water from Marcus. And he's used to getting what he wants. When you refused him, you became a problem, and Thornton solves problems by destroying them. The letters from Sarah, Nathaniel said. How do they fit in? Insurance, backup plan. Eliza met his eyes. If the legal case doesn't work, if the political pressure doesn't work, he'll use the letters to destroy your reputation, make you so toxic that no one will do business with you, force you to sell just to escape the scandal. Would it work? Marcus asked. Nathaniel thought about it, thought about the tight-knit community of ranchers and businessmen, the strict moral codes, the way scandals spread like wildfire through small towns. Maybe, he admitted. Probably. A man who abandons his pregnant fiancée, that's the kind of thing people don't forget. Even if I explained what really happened, there'd always be doubt. Then we need to get those letters back, Tom said, before Thornton uses them. How? Marcus spread his hands. We don't even know where he keeps them. Could be in his office in Cheyenne, could be in a safe in Denver, could be in his house in the middle of town surrounded by armed guards. They're in his office, Eliza said quietly. 3rd floor of the Thornton building in Cheyenne, inside a safe behind the portrait of his father. I saw him put them there. Everyone turned to look at her. You saw him? Nathaniel leaned forward. When? The day I burned his other files on you. I went to his office to quit and he was gloating, showing me the letters, reading parts of them aloud, talking about how perfect they were, how Sarah had been so honest about her feelings for you, about the baby. Her voice went hard. He thought it was funny that she'd died alone because she was too scared to tell you the truth. Nathaniel felt something crack inside his chest. Sarah's letters, filled with her final thoughts and fears, being used as ammunition by a man who'd never met her. Being mocked. "I want those letters," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Nate," Marcus started, "I want them back, whatever it takes." "Even if it means breaking into Thornton's office?" Tom asked. "Because that's what we're talking about here. Theft, breaking and entering, felony charges if we get caught." "I don't care." "You should." Marcus set down his whiskey glass hard enough to make a sound. "You go after those letters and get caught, Thornton wins. He'll have you arrested, locked up, and then who's going to protect this ranch? Who's going to stop him from taking everything?" "Then we don't get caught," Nathaniel said. "And how exactly do we do that?" Eliza cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. "I know the building," she said. "I know his schedule, and I know someone who might be willing to help." "Who?" Nathaniel asked. "Thornton's wife." The room went silent. "His wife," Marcus repeated slowly. "You want us to trust Thornton's wife to help us steal from her husband." "She hates him," Eliza said simply. "Despises him, actually. I could see it every time she looked at him. But she's trapped. No money of her own, nowhere to go, completely dependent on his goodwill." "So why would she help us?" Tom asked. "Because I offered her a way out once, before I left." Eliza looked down at her hands. "I told her that if she ever needed help, if she ever wanted to leave, she should send word to me. I didn't think she'd actually do it, but, Nathaniel prompted, but 2 days before I came here, I got a message, a single word delivered by a street kid to the boarding house where I was staying." She met Nathaniel's eyes. The word was soon. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the snow orange and pink. Inside the study, shadows lengthened across the floor. Nathaniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at his land, the ranch he'd built, the empire he'd created from nothing. Everything he had was tied up in this place, his past, his future, his sense of self. And now it was all at risk because a powerful man wanted what was his. "All right," he said, turning back to the room. "We'll do it. We'll get the letters back, but we do it smart, we do it careful, and we do it in a way that doesn't give Thornton ammunition to use against us." "How?" Marcus asked. Nathaniel looked at Eliza. "You said you know the building. Can you draw me a map? Show me where the office is, where the guards are, how to get in and out?" "Yes." "Then that's where we start." He turned to Tom. "I need you to go into town, quietly. See what you can learn about Thornton's schedule for the next week. When he's there, when he's not." Tom nodded. "Marcus, I need you to hold down the ranch. Keep the men working. Keep everything normal. If Morrison comes back, you haven't seen me and you don't know where I went." "You're going yourself?" Marcus stood. "Nate, that's insane. You're the one Thornton wants. If you get caught, if I send someone else and they get caught, it's my fault. This is my fight, Marcus. I'm not asking anyone else to risk their neck for my mistakes." "It's not a mistake to have loved someone," Eliza said softly. Nathaniel looked at her, this strange woman who'd walked into his life less than 24 hours ago and turned everything upside down. "No," he agreed. "But it's a mistake to let that love be used as a weapon, and I won't make that mistake again." They left before dawn 3 days later, when the world was still locked in that deep darkness that comes just before morning. Nathaniel had told Marcus they'd be gone a week, maybe less if things went smoothly. Marcus had looked at him like he'd lost his mind but hadn't argued beyond a single warning to be careful. Eliza rode beside him on a gray mare, bundled in layers of wool and leather, her damaged hand tucked inside a fur-lined glove. She'd spent the past 3 days drawing maps, explaining guard rotations, describing every detail of the Thornton building she could remember. Now those maps were folded in Nathaniel's saddlebag, along with enough supplies for a week and a pistol he hoped he wouldn't need. The ride to Cheyenne would take 2 days if the weather held. 2 days of cold and silence and too much time to think about everything that could go wrong. They were an hour from the ranch when Eliza finally spoke. "You don't have to do this." Nathaniel glanced at her. In the pre-dawn light, Her face was a pale blur above her dark coat. "We've been over this." "I know, but I need to say it anyway." She shifted in her saddle and he heard the creak of frozen leather. "Those letters, they're important to you. I understand that, but they're not worth dying for. Thornton thinks they are. Thornton's wrong about a lot of things." She paused. "What if we can't get them? What if the safe's too complicated, or there are more guards than I remember, or his wife changes her mind about helping?" "Then we adapt." "And if we can't adapt? If we get caught?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, watching the horizon slowly brighten from black to deep blue. "Then we deal with the consequences." "But Eliza, those letters are the last words Sarah ever wrote. The last piece of her that exists in this world. I'm not going to let Thornton use them to destroy everything I've built." "Even if trying to save them destroys you instead?" "Even then." She didn't respond, and they rode in silence for another mile. Then she said, "You really loved her, Sarah." It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel answered anyway. "I could have loved her, if I'd let myself. If I hadn't been so—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Scared?" Eliza supplied. "Broken." He looked at her. "Emily didn't just lie to me about being pregnant. She made me believe she loved me. Made me believe I could trust again after my parents died, after I'd spent years alone building this ranch from nothing. And when it all fell apart, when I found out it was a setup from the beginning," he shook his head, "I swore I'd never let anyone get that close again. But Sarah got close anyway. She was different, honest. She didn't want my money or my land. She just wanted—" Nathaniel's throat tightened. "She wanted me. The real me, not the cattle baron or the wealthy rancher. Just me. And you pushed her away." "I didn't trust it. Couldn't believe it was real." His hands tightened on the reins. "So I kept her at arm's length. Made excuses why we couldn't get married yet, why she should go back to Denver for a while. And she went because she was patient and kind and willing to wait for me to figure out my own head." "Then she found out she was pregnant," Eliza said softly. "Then she found out she was pregnant. And she knew that if she told me, I'd think it was Emily all over again. Another trap, another lie." The words came out bitter. "So she left, tried to handle it on her own, and died because I was too damaged to give her a reason to stay." The sun was rising now, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, beautiful and cold and empty. "You're not the only one who's broken," Eliza said after a while. "We're all carrying pieces of things that shattered us. The question is what we do with those pieces." "What did you do with yours?" She smiled, though there was no humor in it. "I went to prison for beating a man half to death. So maybe I'm not the best person to give advice on healthy coping mechanisms." "What did he do?" "The man you beat." Her smile faded. "He hurt someone I cared about, someone who couldn't fight back. And I decided that even if the law wouldn't protect her, I would." "Her?" "A girl, 16 years old, working as a maid in the hotel where I was staying." Eliza's voice went flat, emotionless, in a way that told Nathaniel she was feeling too much to let any of it show. He was a regular customer, rich, connected, untouchable, and he thought that meant he could do whatever he wanted. "So you stopped him." "I stopped him." She looked down at her bandaged hand. "Broke his jaw with a candlestick holder. Broke his ribs when he tried to get up. Gave him a concussion when he tried to run. The girl testified on my behalf, told the judge exactly what he'd been doing to her. But I still got 3 months because apparently there's a limit to how much justice you're allowed to dispense with hotel furniture." Despite everything, Nathaniel felt a smile tugging at his lips. A candlestick holder. It was heavy, brass with a marble base. She met his eyes, and he saw something fierce and unapologetic in her gaze. "And I'd do it again. Every single time." They rode in comfortable silence after that, letting the horses set the pace while the sun climbed higher and the temperature rose from brutal to merely freezing. Around midday, they stopped to rest the animals and eat a cold meal of dried meat and hard bread. "Tell me about Thornton's wife," Nathaniel said as they sat on a fallen log, passing a canteen of water back and forth. "What's she like?" "Trapped." Eliza pulled off her glove and examined her healing fingers. The tips were blackened and dead, but the rest showed healthy pink skin. Her name is Catherine. She's maybe 40, though she looks older. Thornton married her 15 years ago for her family's political connections. She married him because her father told her to. Does he hurt her? Not physically. He's too smart for that. She flexed her hand carefully. But he controls everything. Her money, her friends, where she goes, what she wears. She can't leave the house without his permission. Can't spend more than $5 without explaining why. He's turned her into a prisoner in her own life. And you think she'll help us? I think she's desperate enough to try. Eliza pulled her glove back on. When I worked there, I saw her watching him. The way you'd watch a snake you can't kill but can't escape from either. She's been waiting for an opportunity, I think. A crack in his armor. And we're that crack. We could be. She stood, brushing snow from her coat. Or we could be the thing that gets her killed. Thornton doesn't tolerate betrayal, and his wife turning against him would be the ultimate betrayal in his eyes. Nathaniel stood as well, catching her arm before she could turn away. If this is too dangerous, everything worth doing is dangerous. She pulled free gently. You should know that better than anyone. They reached the outskirts of Cheyenne late the following afternoon, when the winter sun was already sliding toward the horizon. The town had grown since Nathaniel's last visit 2 years ago. New buildings, wider streets, more people. The railroad had done that, bringing commerce and ambition and the kind of explosive growth that turned frontier settlements into real cities almost overnight. The Thornton building stood in the center of town, 4 stories of brick and glass that dwarfed everything around it. Nathaniel and Eliza passed it without slowing, just 2 more travelers on their way to somewhere else. But Nathaniel studied it from the corner of his eye, noting the guards at the front entrance, the lit windows on the upper floors, the alley that ran along the east side. They found a boarding house 3 blocks away, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who took their money without asking questions. Tom had sent word ahead through his network of contacts, and she showed them to a pair of rooms on the 2nd floor that faced away from the street. You'll want to keep your curtains drawn, she said in accented English, her eyes sharp despite her age. And if anyone asks, you're here looking at ranch equipment, nothing to do with Thornton or his business. Does everyone in town know about him? Nathaniel asked. Everyone knows about him. Not everyone's smart enough to stay out of his way. She handed him 2 keys. You seem smart. Don't make me regret taking you in. After she left, Nathaniel and Eliza stood in the narrow hallway between their rooms. We should rest, Eliza said. Tomorrow we'll need to scout the building properly, figure out the guard changes, maybe make contact with Catherine if we can. And tonight? Tonight we wait. She unlocked her door. Try not to think too much about what we're doing. That's when doubt creeps in. But thinking was exactly what Nathaniel did as he lay on the narrow bed in his rented room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city outside. Voices, horses, the distant whistle of a train. Normal sounds from a normal evening in a growing town. Except nothing about this was normal. He was planning to break into the office of one of the most powerful men in the territory, steal documents that could ruin him, and rely on the help of a woman he'd known for less than a week and the wife of his enemy. It was insane. Reckless. It was also necessary. Nathaniel thought about Sarah, about the letters she'd written in her final weeks, about the son she'd carried and lost, the boy who would have been named Jonathan, his son, a child who'd died because Nathaniel had been too broken to believe in love. He must have slept eventually, because the next thing he knew, pale light was filtering through the curtains, and someone was knocking on his door. He opened it to find Eliza dressed in men's clothing, trousers, a work shirt, a cap pulled low over her eyes. She'd bound her chest flat and smudged dirt on her face. In the dim morning light, she could have passed for a young man easily. We're going to the Thornton building, she said. I'll go in through the service entrance, see if any of the staff I knew are still there. You stay outside, watch the comings and goings, get a feel for the patterns. You're going in alone? I worked there for 3 weeks. Some of the servants might remember me, might be willing to talk. But if you walk in there, someone will recognize you. Thornton probably has your description circulated to every guard in the building. She was right, though Nathaniel hated admitting it. What if someone recognizes you? Then I'll say I'm looking for work, that I heard they pay well, and I'm desperate. She adjusted her cap. It's not far from the truth. They left separately, Eliza through the front door, Nathaniel through the back. He circled around 3 blocks before approaching the Thornton building from the opposite direction, just another rancher in town for business, bundled against the cold. The building was already busy despite the early hour. Men in suits hurried in and out of the main entrance while delivery wagons pulled up to the service doors in the alley. Nathaniel found a spot across the street where he could watch without being obvious, pretending to read a newspaper he'd bought from a corner vendor. He'd been there 20 minutes when he saw her. Catherine Thornton stepped out of a carriage at the front entrance, wrapped in furs that probably cost more than Nathaniel's entire herd. But Eliza had been right about her looking older than her years. Even from across the street, Nathaniel could see the tired lines around her eyes, the careful way she held herself, as if bracing for a blow. A man in an expensive coat, Thornton himself, Nathaniel realized with a jolt of recognition, emerged from the building to meet her. He said something Nathaniel couldn't hear and Catherine flinched. Just a slight movement, quickly controlled but unmistakable. Thornton offered his arm. Catherine took it. They walked into the building together, the picture of a respectable married couple. Nathaniel felt sick. He stayed in position for another hour, watching the patterns emerge. Guards changed shift at 8. Deliveries came mostly between 6 and 9 in the morning. Office workers arrived between 7:30 and 9, left for lunch around noon, returned by 1. The building was busiest in the morning and late afternoon, quietest around midday. When Eliza finally reappeared, she walked right past him without acknowledging his presence. Nathaniel waited 5 minutes, then followed at a distance. She was waiting for him 2 blocks away in a small park that was empty except for a few pigeons pecking at frozen ground. "Well?" he asked. "I found Mary, one of the kitchen staff I used to know." Eliza pulled off her cap, and her dark hair tumbled free. "She's willing to help. Says Catherine has been asking about me, wanting to know if anyone had seen me." "Asking openly?" "No, carefully, privately. The way someone asks when they don't want their husband to find out." She sat on a bench, and Nathaniel joined her. "Mary's going to get a message to Catherine. Tell her we're here and we need to meet." "Where?" "There's a church 3 blocks south of the building, St. Anthony's. Catherine goes there every Tuesday afternoon for what she tells Thornton is a ladies' prayer group. But Mary says half the time she just sits in the empty sanctuary alone." "Today's Tuesday." "I know." Eliza looked at him. "Mary said Catherine will be there at 2 o'clock. If we're going to make contact, that's our chance." St. Anthony's was a small stone church tucked between 2 larger buildings, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Nathaniel and Eliza arrived at 1:30 and slipped inside through a side door, finding seats in the back where they could watch without being seen. The interior was dim and cold, lit only by candles and the weak winter sun filtering through stained glass windows. A few people sat scattered throughout the pews, old women mostly, wrapped in shawls, their lips moving in silent prayer. At exactly 2 o'clock, Catherine Thornton entered. She walked alone, moving down the center aisle with that same careful posture Nathaniel had noticed earlier. She wore a simpler dress now, dark blue wool instead of silk, and her hair was covered with a modest hat. She looked like any other respectable woman seeking solace in prayer. But when she slid into a pew near the front and bowed her head, Nathaniel saw her shoulders shake. Just once, quickly controlled. Eliza stood. "Wait here." She moved forward silently, her boots making no sound on the stone floor. When she reached Catherine's pew, she didn't sit beside her. Instead, she knelt in the pew directly behind, close enough to whisper without being overheard. From where Nathaniel sat, he couldn't hear what they said, but he saw Catherine stiffen, then slowly turn her head, saw recognition flash across her face, followed by something that might have been relief or fear or both. They spoke for perhaps 5 minutes, 2 women bent in prayer, anyone watching would think, sharing quiet devotions. Then Eliza stood and walked back down the aisle, passing Nathaniel without a glance. He waited another 10 minutes before following. He found Eliza in a coffee house 2 streets over, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee steaming on the table. "She'll help," Eliza said as he slid into the seat across from her. "But she wants something in return." "What?" "Passage out of Cheyenne. Money. A new name if possible." Eliza wrapped her hands around her cup. "She wants to disappear completely, where Thornton can never find her. That's not easy to arrange." No, but it's possible. She met his eyes. The question is whether you're willing to do it. Because if we take his letters and his wife in the same night, Thornton won't just be angry, he'll be murderous. Nathaniel thought about Catherine's flinch when her husband spoke to her, about 15 years of being controlled and contained and slowly crushed. We'll get her out, he said. Whatever it takes. Eliza smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. I was hoping you'd say that. What's the plan? Thursday night, there's a dinner at the governor's mansion that Thornton has to attend. He'll take Catherine with him for appearances, but she'll make an excuse to leave early, claim a headache, something believable. She'll come straight to the church, where we'll be waiting with horses and supplies. And the letters? While she's keeping Thornton occupied at the dinner, we break into his office. Catherine gave me the combination to the safe. Eliza pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket. Wrote it down in code during our conversation. She said the safe is old, mechanical. If we're careful, we can open it without triggering any alarms. If we're careful, everything depends on being careful. She pushed the second coffee cup toward him. We'll have maybe 4 hours between when Thornton leaves for the dinner and when Catherine makes her exit. That's our window. 4 hours to break into a guarded building, crack a safe, steal documents, and get out without being seen. Nathaniel took a drink of coffee. It was terrible, bitter and weak and lukewarm. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, Eliza said cheerfully. But we're doing it anyway. The next 2 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. They spent the time preparing, buying supplies, studying the building at different times of day, working out every detail of the plan until Nathaniel could walk through it in his sleep. Eliza proved to be meticulous in her planning. She'd drawn up 3 different escape routes, identified backup meeting points, even arranged for fresh horses to be waiting at a stable on the edge of town. It was the kind of thorough preparation that came from experience, and Nathaniel found himself wondering exactly what kind of life she'd lived before showing up at his ranch. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear, with a thin moon rising over the city. Nathaniel stood in his rented room, checking his weapons for the 10th time. A pistol in a shoulder holster, a knife in his boot, lockpicks he'd bought from a man who didn't ask questions. A knock on the door made him turn. Eliza entered without waiting for permission. She'd changed into dark clothing, black trousers, a black shirt, her hair tied back severely. She looked dangerous and capable, and nothing like the half-frozen woman who'd appeared at his gate a week ago. "It's time," she said. They moved through the streets like shadows, staying to alleys and side roads, avoiding the main thoroughfares where gas lamps cast pools of yellow light. The Thornton building loomed ahead, most of its windows dark now that the workday had ended. But the 3rd floor, Thornton's personal office, showed light. "Guards," Eliza whispered, making their rounds. Catherine said they check every hour on the hour. "What time is it now?" 8:15. "We've got 45 minutes until the next check." They approached from the east alley, where a service door stood recessed in shadow. Eliza produced a key, another gift from Catherine, and the lock opened with a soft click. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as they made their way to the stairwell, climbing 3 flights in darkness. At the 3rd floor landing, Eliza held up a hand. "Wait!" She cracked the door and peered through. Nathaniel heard voices, 2 guards talking about a card game, then footsteps moving away, fading into silence. "Now!" They slipped into the corridor and ran, soft and quick, to the door at the far end. Thornton's office. The nameplate gleamed in the dim light. James Thornton, President. Another key from Catherine. Another lock opening. Then they were inside, closing the door behind them and standing in the center of a room that reeked of money and power. Heavy furniture, imported rugs, and on the far wall, a portrait of an older man who looked like Thornton, but harder, meaner. "That's the one," Eliza said, pointing at the portrait. "Behind it." Nathaniel crossed the room and carefully lifted the painting from the wall. Behind it, set into the plaster, was a safe with a combination dial. He pulled out the paper Catherine had given them and began working the lock. Left to 23. Right to 8. Left to 41. The safe didn't open. "Try it again," Eliza whispered. "Maybe you went past one of the numbers." Nathaniel tried again, moving slower this time, feeling for the clicks. 23. 841. Still nothing. She gave us the wrong combination, he said, feeling panic rise in his chest. No, she wouldn't do that. Eliza moved beside him, studying the safe. Wait, look at the numbers she wrote. The way the 8 is formed, that could be a 6 in her handwriting. You think it's 23, 6, 41? Try it. He did. And this time, on the final number, he felt the mechanism give. The safe door swung open with a soft groan. Inside were stacks of papers, deed records, contracts, and there, in a leather folder tied with string, were the letters. Nathaniel pulled them out with shaking hands. 7 envelopes, each addressed in Sarah's familiar handwriting. To Nathaniel Cross. Personal. He wanted to read them right there, wanted to absorb every word she'd written, but there was no time. We need to go, Eliza said. Now. Nathaniel shoved the letters inside his coat and started to close the safe. Then he saw something else, another folder, this one marked with his ranch's name. He grabbed it too. They were halfway to the door when they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy boots, moving fast. The guards, Eliza breathed. They're early. The window? We're 3 stories up. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A key rattled in the lock. Nathaniel looked around frantically. No other exits, no place to hide. Nothing but furniture and expensive rugs, and the open safe behind the portrait that would tell anyone who looked exactly what they'd been doing. The door began to open, and Eliza did something Nathaniel would never have expected. She grabbed him, pulled him close, and kissed him. Not a gentle kiss, a fierce one, desperate and claiming, her hands fisting in his coat. And Nathaniel, after a moment of shock, understood what she was doing and kissed her back with equal intensity. The door opened fully, light flooded in, and a guard's voice said, "What the hell?" Eliza broke the kiss and turned, keeping herself between Nathaniel and the guard. "Oh, I'm so sorry. We didn't think anyone would. We just needed somewhere private." The guard was young, barely 20, and his face had gone bright red. Behind him, an older guard appeared, his hand on his weapon. "This is private property," the older one said. "How did you get in here?" "The door was unlocked," Eliza said, her voice breathless and embarrassed. "We're staying at a boarding house nearby, but the walls are so thin and we just wanted somewhere we could—" She trailed off, letting implication fill the silence. "You can't be in here," the young guard said, but he sounded uncertain. I know. We're leaving right now." Eliza grabbed Nathaniel's hand and pulled him toward the door. "We're so sorry. It won't happen again." They pushed past the guards into the corridor. Behind them, Nathaniel heard the older one say, "Check the office. Make sure nothing's been disturbed." "Run," Eliza whispered. They ran. Down the corridor through the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind them, shouts erupted. The guards had found the open safe. "They're raising the alarm," Nathaniel gasped. "Keep moving." They burst through the service door into the alley just as bells began ringing throughout the building. Eliza grabbed Nathaniel's arm and pulled him left, away from the main streets, into a maze of back alleys she'd memorized during their days of preparation. They ran for 10 minutes, twisting and turning, until the shouts faded behind them. Only then did Eliza slow to a walk, both of them breathing hard. "The church," she said. "We need to get to the church." They reached St. Anthony's at 10 minutes to 9. Catherine was already there, waiting in the shadows beside the building. She wore a traveling dress and carried a small bag, everything she owned that she could take without raising suspicion. "Did you get them?" she asked. Nathaniel pulled the letters from his coat. "We got them." Catherine's face relaxed for the first time since he'd met her. "Then let's go, before he realizes I'm gone." They had horses waiting 3 blocks away, saddled and ready. Nathaniel helped Catherine mount. She clearly wasn't used to riding astride, while Eliza checked their supplies. "We head west," Eliza said, "back to the ranch. We can keep Catherine there until we arrange permanent passage out of the territory." "He'll come after us," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "When he finds out what we've done, he'll come with everything he has." "Let him come." Nathaniel swung into his saddle, the letters safely tucked against his heart. "I'm done running from powerful men who think they can take whatever they want." They rode out of Cheyenne at a gallop, 3 fugitives racing into the darkness with stolen letters and a rescued woman, and the certainty that behind them, James Thornton was discovering his carefully laid plans, had just gone up in smoke. And Nathaniel, for the first time in 4 years, felt something other than fear or anger or hollow resignation. He felt alive. The horses were exhausted by the time they reached the ranch 2 days later, their breath coming in ragged plumes of steam, their coats dark with sweat despite the freezing air. Nathaniel had pushed them hard, stopping only when absolutely necessary, always listening for the sound of pursuit that never quite materialized but felt inevitable nonetheless. Marcus met them at the gate, his rifle in hand and his face grim. "Trouble?" Nathaniel asked, swinging down from his saddle. "Not yet, but Tom rode in from town this morning with news. Thornton's offering a reward, $5,000 for information leading to your arrest. Another $5,000 for the woman." Marcus's eyes moved to Catherine, who sat pale and trembling on her exhausted horse. "And $10,000 for his wife, returned unharmed." $20,000, Eliza said quietly. "That's enough to make anyone think twice about loyalty." "Not my men," Marcus said. But Nathaniel heard the uncertainty beneath the words. 20,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime, enough to turn even honest men into traitors. They helped Catherine down from her horse. She could barely stand, her legs shaking from 2 days of hard riding and fear. Nathaniel caught her elbow before she could fall. "Get her inside," he told Marcus. "Hot food, a warm bed, whatever she needs." "And you?" Marcus asked. "I need to read these letters." Nathaniel touched his coat where Sarah's words lay pressed against his heart. "Then I need to figure out how to survive what's coming." He retreated to his study while Marcus and Eliza got Catherine settled. The folder he'd taken from Thornton's safe lay unopened on his desk, but Nathaniel ignored it in favor of the leather-bound packet of letters. 7 envelopes, each one sealed and addressed in Sarah's careful handwriting. His hands shook as he opened the first one. "My dearest Nathaniel," it began, "I'm writing this from Denver, from a small room in a boarding house where the walls are thin and the November wind finds every crack. I should have told you in person, but I was afraid. Not of you, never of you, but of what you might think when I said the words aloud. I am with child, our child, a life we created during those stolen weeks when I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, you could learn to trust again." Nathaniel had to stop reading. His vision had blurred and something hot was pressing against the back of his throat. He set the letter down and stood, pacing to the window, trying to master himself. Sarah had been pregnant, had known she was pregnant, and instead of telling him, instead of trusting him with the truth, she'd run because she thought he'd accuse her of lying, just like Emily had lied. And the worst part, the part that made him want to put his fist through the wall, was that she'd been right. If she'd come to him with that news, his first instinct would have been suspicion. His first thought would have been trap. He'd trained himself so well to see deception that he'd become incapable of recognizing truth. He forced himself to return to the desk, to pick up the second letter. This one was dated a week later. Sarah wrote about morning sickness, about the doctor she'd found, about her fear and hope tangled together. She wrote about the baby, their son, she was somehow certain, and the future she imagined. A small house, maybe near the ranch but separate, where Nathaniel could visit when he was ready, where their child could grow up knowing his father without demanding more than Nathaniel was ready to give. "I won't trap you," she wrote. "I won't force you into a life you don't want. But I need you to know that this child is real, and he is yours, and I will love him enough for both of us if I have to." The third letter was shorter, written in a shakier hand. Sarah had fallen ill. "Nothing serious," she assured him, "just a fever. The doctor said to rest and drink fluids. She'd be fine in a few days." The fourth letter never came. Instead, the fifth was written by someone else, a woman named Anne, who'd been Sarah's friend and roommate. She wrote that Sarah had taken a turn for the worse, that the fever was cholera, that she'd been moved to the hospital, that she was asking for Nathaniel but understood if he didn't come. The sixth letter was also from Anne. Sarah had died in the early morning hours, peacefully, holding Anne's hand. The baby had been too small to survive without her. They'd buried them together in the city cemetery, mother and son, under a simple stone. The seventh and final letter was in Sarah's handwriting again, written before she'd gotten sick and given to Anne with instructions to send it if anything happened. Nathaniel almost couldn't open it. When he finally did, the first line broke him completely. "Don't blame yourself," she'd written. "I made my choices freely, and I don't regret a single one. You gave me the happiest months of my life, Nathaniel. You made me feel seen and valued and cherished, even when you were too scared to say the words aloud. That was enough. It was always enough." She went on to write about forgiveness, about understanding, about how she hoped he'd find someone who could reach past his walls and pull him back into the world, someone patient and brave and stubborn enough not to give up on him. The letter ended with a single line. "Love is not a trap. It's a choice. Choose it, Nathaniel, for both of us." He sat at his desk as darkness fell outside. Sarah's letters spread before him like accusations. She'd loved him, truly loved him, and he'd been so broken by Emily's betrayal that he'd pushed that love away, had made Sarah believe she had to face pregnancy and illness and death alone rather than risk his rejection. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He wiped his face quickly, trying to compose himself. "Come in." Eliza entered carrying a tray with food and coffee. She took one look at him and set the tray down, crossing to the window to give him a moment of privacy. "You read them," she said quietly. "All of them." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Nathaniel's voice came out rough. "You were right to bring them to me. I needed to know, needed to understand what I'd lost." Eliza turned to face him, and in the lamplight her features were soft with sympathy. "What did she say?" "That she loved me, that she forgave me, that I should choose love instead of fear." He laughed, but it came out broken. "She was better than I deserved. Maybe, or maybe she just saw who you could be if you let yourself." "And who's that?" "Someone worth fighting for." Eliza moved to the desk and picked up the unopened folder. "What's this?" "Documents from Thornton's safe. I grabbed them on impulse." Nathaniel reached for the folder, but Eliza had already opened it. Her expression changed as she read, going from curious to shocked to furious in the space of seconds. "That son of a bitch," she breathed. "What?" She turned the documents toward him. "These are land deeds, transfer papers, proof that Thornton's been systematically buying up property around your ranch through shell companies and false names. He's been surrounding you, Nathaniel, creating a noose of ownership that would let him control every access route to your water." Nathaniel took the papers and read them carefully. She was right. Over the past 2 years, Thornton had quietly purchased 7 different properties, small ranches, abandoned homesteads, stretches of apparently worthless land. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a strategic barrier that would make it nearly impossible for Nathaniel to move his cattle to market or access the river that fed his grazing lands. "This is illegal," Nathaniel said. "You can't hide ownership like this. It's fraud." "It's only illegal if someone can prove it. And who's going to investigate? Thornton owns half the territorial government." Eliza flipped through more papers. "But these documents prove everything. The false names, the shell companies, the systematic acquisition. If we could get this to the right people." "What right people?" "Every judge, every politician, every lawman worth a damn is either in Thornton's pocket or too scared to cross him." "Not every lawman." A new voice spoke from the doorway. They both turned to find Catherine standing there, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, looking stronger than she had when they'd arrived. "My brother," she continued, stepping into the room. "Daniel Walsh. He's a federal marshal based in Denver. He's been trying to build a case against my husband for years, but he's never had enough evidence." She looked at the documents spread across Nathaniel's desk. "Until now." "Your brother," Nathaniel said slowly. "Thornton knows you have a brother in law enforcement." "Of course. But he thinks Daniel's been neutralized. That family loyalty would keep him from investigating his own brother-in-law." Catherine's smile was bitter. "He doesn't understand that Daniel stopped seeing James as family the first time he made me cry and told me it was my fault for being too sensitive." Eliza leaned forward. "Would Daniel help us, knowing it could destroy his sister's marriage?" "My marriage has been destroyed for a decade. I've just been too afraid to admit it." Catherine crossed to the desk and picked up one of the documents. "Daniel would help, not just because he's my brother, but because bringing down James Thornton has been his obsession almost as long as it's been mine. He just needed proof. And now we have it, Nathaniel said. Now we have it, Catherine agreed. The question is how we get it to him before James figures out what we're planning. The answer came sooner than any of them expected. The next morning, Marcus burst into the house just after dawn, his face pale beneath the stubble. "Riders," he said. "At least 20 of them. Maybe more. Coming fast from the east." Nathaniel grabbed his rifle and ran for the door. Outside, the sun was just breaking the horizon, painting the snow gold and pink. And against that beautiful backdrop, a small army of men approached on horseback. At their head rode Morrison and his brother, the same men who'd come days ago. But behind them were faces Nathaniel didn't recognize, hired guns from the look of them, hard men with harder eyes. And in the middle of the group, sitting tall in his saddle like a conquering general, rode James Thornton himself. "Get Catherine out of sight," Nathaniel told Marcus. "Take her to the cellar. Don't let her be seen." "What about Eliza?" Nathaniel looked back at the house and saw Eliza standing in the doorway, her rifle in her hands and her face set with determination. "She stays with me," he said. Marcus didn't argue. He disappeared inside while Nathaniel and Eliza positioned themselves on the porch. Tom and the other ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse and the stable, all armed, all ready. The riders stopped at the gate. Thornton dismounted and walked forward alone, his expensive coat making him look absurdly out of place against the rough frontier landscape. "Mr. Cross," he called out, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "You'll need to be more specific," Nathaniel called back. "I've got a lot of things. Cattle, land, self-respect. You're welcome to none of them." Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My wife. You abducted my wife." "I didn't abduct anyone. Catherine left of her own free will." "Impossible. My wife would never leave me, which means you either coerced her or kidnapped her." Thornton's hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. "Either way, it's a hanging offense." "You want to talk about offenses?" Eliza stepped forward, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Let's talk about fraud, about using shell companies to illegally acquire land, about forging documents and bribing officials and building a criminal empire while pretending to be a respectable businessman." Thornton's expression flickered, just for a moment, surprise and calculation warring across his features. Then the mask slammed back into place. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Miss Hart. Though I note you're making wild accusations while harboring my wife and refusing to return property that was stolen from my office." "You mean the letters?" Nathaniel asked. "The ones you plan to use to destroy my reputation? Those letters were written to me. They belong to me. You're the thief here, Thornton, not us." "A judge might see it differently." "Then get a judge. Get a warrant. Come back with legal authority instead of hired guns and threats." Nathaniel raised his rifle slightly. "Until then, you're trespassing on my land, and I'm well within my rights to defend it." Thornton looked at the ranch hands positioned around the property, at the rifles pointed in his direction, at the determination on Nathaniel's face. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and he knew it, but he smiled anyway. "You know what I love about winter, Cross? It's unpredictable. Storms blow in out of nowhere. Supplies get delayed. Accidents happen." His voice dropped, going soft and dangerous. "Would be a shame if something happened to this beautiful ranch of yours. Fire spreads so quickly when everything's dry, and in this cold, help would take hours to arrive." The threat was clear. Nathaniel felt his finger tighten on the trigger. "If you touch this ranch," he said quietly, "if you harm my people or my property, I will spend every dollar I have and every breath left in my body destroying you. Not just your business, you. I'll expose every corrupt deal, every bribed official, every illegal acquisition. I'll tear down your empire brick by brick and dance on the ruins." Bold words from a man who's already lost. Thornton mounted his horse with fluid grace. "You've got 48 hours, Cross. Return my wife and the documents you stole, or I'll have every lawman in the territory here with warrants for your arrest. Kidnapping, theft, assault on my security personnel. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and this ranch will be sold at auction to cover your legal fees." He wheeled his horse around. "Oh, and Cross, that reward I'm offering, I just doubled it. $40,000 for information leading to your conviction. See how loyal your men stay when that kind of money's on the table. The riders left in a cloud of snow and menace, leaving silence in their wake. He's bluffing, Tom said after they'd gone. He can't get warrants that fast. Yes, he can, Catherine said from the doorway. She'd emerged from the house despite orders, her face pale but resolute. He has judges who owe him favors, politicians who depend on his money. He can get warrants by tomorrow if he wants them. Then we need to move faster. Eliza turned to Catherine. Your brother. How quickly can you get word to him? I can write a message tonight, but getting it to Denver will take days. We don't have days, Nathaniel said. We have 48 hours. Then we make those 48 hours count. Eliza's mind was clearly racing. We need to split up. Nathaniel stays here, holds the ranch, keeps Thornton's attention focused on him. Catherine and I ride to Denver with the documents. We deliver them to her brother personally, make sure they can't be intercepted or lost. You'll never make it, Marcus said. Thornton will have men watching every route out of town. The minute you leave, they'll follow. Not if we create a distraction. Tom stepped forward. Some of us could ride out in different directions. Make Thornton's men split up, chase the wrong targets while the real package gets through. That's suicide, Nathaniel said. Byron, Thornton's men won't just follow you. They'll stop you, violently if necessary. Maybe. But we're not helpless, boss. And we're not going to let that bastard win just because he's got money and connections. Tom looked around at the other ranch hands, and Nathaniel saw agreement on every face. You took us in when no one else would, gave us work and respect and a place to belong. Now it's our turn to return the favor. Nathaniel felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. These men didn't owe him anything beyond their wages, but they were willing to risk their lives anyway, not out of obligation, but out of loyalty. It was humbling and terrifying. All right, he said slowly. But we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. The goal is distraction, not confrontation. Make Thornton's men chase ghosts while Catherine and Eliza slip through. They spent the rest of the day planning. Tom would lead a group south toward Colorado, making it look like they were heading for the territorial border. Marcus would take another group east, as if trying to reach the railroad. And Billy, young and fearless, would ride north alone, drawing off any stragglers. Meanwhile, Catherine and Eliza would head west through the mountains, the hardest route, the one Thornton would least expect, because it meant 2 days of brutal riding through snow and cold with no guarantee of shelter. I can handle it, Catherine insisted when Nathaniel questioned the plan. I'm tougher than I look, and I'm more motivated than you can imagine. That night, Nathaniel found himself unable to sleep. He paced his study, reading and rereading Sarah's letters, trying to absorb the forgiveness she'd offered and the future she'd envisioned for him. Choose love, she'd written. Choose it. But how did you choose love when everything you'd built was under attack? When choosing wrong could cost you everything? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Eliza entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, pouring generous measures. Too much to think about. Too much to lose, you mean? She handed him a glass and took a seat in the chair across from his desk. I've been thinking about what happens after we deliver those documents to Catherine's brother. After? After Thornton is arrested. After his empire falls. After you're free. She met his eyes. What then, Nathaniel? What do you do with a life that's no longer defined by what you're fighting against? It was a question he hadn't let himself consider. For so long, his existence had been about survival, about building walls and protecting what was his. The idea of actually living, of choosing something beyond mere endurance, felt foreign. I don't know, he admitted. I think you do. I think you've known for a while, but you're too scared to say it out loud. Eliza took a long drink of whiskey. Sarah told you to choose love, not someday, not eventually, now, while you still can. Sarah's gone. I'm not talking about Sarah. Eliza set down her glass and leaned forward. I'm talking about choosing to let people in, choosing to trust that not everyone who gets close is looking to hurt you, choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve something more than loneliness and suspicion. Nathaniel stared at her. At this woman who'd walked out of a blizzard and turned his carefully ordered world upside down, who'd proven herself over and over, with actions, not words, who'd asked for nothing except a chance and given back everything she had. "Why did you kiss me?" he asked suddenly. "In Thornton's office. You could have found another way to distract those guards." "Could I?" She smiled slightly. "Or maybe I'd been wanting to kiss you since the night I arrived, and the guards were just a convenient excuse." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. "I'm broken," Nathaniel said quietly. "Emily broke me. Sarah's death broke me. I don't know if I can be what anyone needs." "I'm not asking you to be what anyone needs. I'm asking you to be who you are." Eliza stood and crossed to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes. "Broken doesn't mean worthless, Nathaniel. It just means you've survived things that should have destroyed you, and survival takes strength. You think I'm strong? I think you're the strongest man I've ever met, and the most scared." She touched his face, gentle despite her calloused palm. "But fear's just another wall, isn't it? And walls can be torn down." Nathaniel caught her hand, held it against his cheek. "If this goes wrong tomorrow, if Thornton wins, he won't. But if he does, then we'll face it together." She pulled her hand free and stepped back. "That's what choosing love means, Nathaniel. Not promising perfection or certainty or safety, just promising not to face the darkness alone." She left before he could respond, closing the door softly behind her. Nathaniel sat in his study as the fire burned low, thinking about choices and walls, and the woman who'd somehow slipped past every defense he'd built. Sarah had asked him to choose love. Eliza was offering him the chance. The question was whether he was brave enough to take it. Dawn came too quickly. The ranch exploded into controlled chaos as horses were saddled, supplies packed, final preparations made. Catherine emerged from the house dressed in men's riding clothes, her hair bound up under a hat, her face set with determination that reminded Nathaniel eerily of Eliza. "Ready?" Eliza asked her. "More than ready. I've been ready to leave James for 15 years. Catherine mounted her horse with surprising grace. "Let's finish this." The decoy groups left first, Tom's team heading south with a show of obvious haste, Marcus's group thundering east toward the railroad, Billy racing north like the young fool he pretended to be. Each departure was designed to draw attention, to scatter Thornton's watchers, to create windows of opportunity. And in those windows, when all eyes were looking the wrong direction, Catherine and Eliza slipped away west into the mountains. Nathaniel watched them go until they disappeared into the tree line. Then he turned back to the ranch and the handful of men who'd stayed behind to help him hold it. "Now what?" one of them asked. "Now we wait," Nathaniel said, "and we prepare for whatever Thornton sends next." What Thornton sent was worse than any of them expected. That afternoon, 3 wagons rolled up to the ranch gate carrying territorial marshals, official warrants, and enough firepower to start a small war. The lead marshal, a hard-faced man named Cooper, dismounted and approached the house with papers in hand. "Nathaniel Cross, you're under arrest for kidnapping, theft, assault, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Cooper's voice was flat, professional. "You can come peacefully, or we can take you by force. Your choice." Nathaniel stood on his porch, very aware of the rifles pointed in his direction. "Those charges are false." "That's for a judge to decide. Right now, I've got legal warrants and orders to bring you in." Cooper gestured to his men. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. And if I refuse, then we'll burn this place to the ground with legal authority." Cooper's expression never changed. "Mr. Thornton has friends in high places, Cross. Friends who want this resolved quickly and quietly. You're outmatched." Nathaniel looked at the marshals, at their weapons, at the absolute certainty on their faces that they were on the right side of the law. He looked at his men, saw them ready to fight despite impossible odds. And he made a choice. "Stand down," he told his ranch hands. "Don't fight them." "Boss, one of them started. "I said stand down." Nathaniel set his rifle against the porch railing and held up his empty hands. "I'll go peacefully, but I want it noted that these charges are manufactured by a man trying to cover his own crimes." "Noted," Cooper said without interest. "Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." They shackled him like a common criminal and loaded him into one of the wagons. As they pulled away from the ranch, Nathaniel took one last look at the place he'd built from nothing. And he thought about Eliza and Catherine riding hard through mountain passes with documents that could tear down an empire. He thought about the choice Sarah had asked him to make. And he thought about the fact that for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something that mattered. The jail in Cheyenne smelled like rust and despair. Nathaniel sat on a narrow cot in a cell barely large enough to stand in, his hands still bearing the marks from the shackles they'd finally removed an hour ago. Through the barred window high on the wall, he could see a slice of gray sky and nothing else. He'd been here for 2 days. 2 days of silence broken only by the sounds of other prisoners coughing, cursing, weeping. 2 days of wondering if Eliza and Catherine had made it through the mountains. 2 days of fighting the fear that he'd gambled everything and lost. The door at the end of the corridor clanged open. Footsteps approached, and Nathaniel looked up to see Marshal Cooper standing outside his cell, accompanied by a man Nathaniel didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. "You have a visitor," Cooper said, unlocking the cell door. 30 minutes, that's all you get." The stranger entered, and Cooper retreated to the end of the corridor, just out of earshot, but close enough to intervene if needed. "Mr. Cross," the man said, extending his hand, "my name is Daniel Walsh. I believe you know my sister." Nathaniel stood so quickly he nearly hit his head on the low ceiling. "Catherine, is she safe? In Denver, under federal protection." Walsh's handshake was firm and brief. "She arrived yesterday evening with Miss Hart and enough evidence to bury my brother-in-law 10 times over." The relief was so intense Nathaniel had to sit back down. "They made it through." "Barely. From what Catherine told me, they ran into a snowstorm in the high passes and had to shelter in an abandoned mine for a night. Miss Hart apparently kept them both alive with nothing but a tin of matches and sheer stubbornness." Walsh pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is for you, from Miss Hart." Nathaniel took the paper with shaking hands and unfolded it. Eliza's handwriting was surprisingly elegant, each letter carefully formed. "We're safe. Your Catherine is tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She saved my life when my horse went down in a ravine. Daniel has the documents and says they're exactly what he needed. Thornton doesn't know yet that we made it through. He thinks you're his only problem. Use that. And Nathaniel, don't give up. I didn't walk through a blizzard just to watch you surrender now. E." Nathaniel read it twice, then looked up at Walsh. "What happens now?" "Now I do what I've been trying to do for 3 years, build an airtight case against James Thornton." Walsh sat on the cot beside Nathaniel, his voice dropping. "The documents you recovered prove systematic fraud, illegal land acquisition, bribery of public officials. Combined with Catherine's testimony about his other activities and the pressure he's put on you, I can get warrants that will stick." "How long will that take?" "I've already started. I have contacts in the territorial government who aren't under Thornton's thumb. Not many, but enough. By tomorrow morning, I'll have federal warrants for his arrest." Walsh paused. "But that's not why I'm here." "No?" "No. I'm here because Thornton is pushing hard to have you charged, convicted, and sentenced before anyone can question his narrative. He's got a trial scheduled for 3 days from now, Judge Whitmore presiding. Whitmore's in Thornton's pocket. I know, which is why we need to move faster than he expects." Walsh leaned forward. "I'm going to request a change of venue. Move your trial to Denver, where I have more influence. But that will take time we don't have. So in the meantime, you need to hold out. Don't confess to anything. Don't make any deals. And most importantly, don't let them break you." "I've been broken before," Nathaniel said quietly. "I survived it." "Then survive it again." Walsh stood. "Because if you break now, Thornton wins. And my sister's freedom, Miss Hart's safety, and everything you fought for will be for nothing." He left, and Nathaniel was alone again with his thoughts and Eliza's letter. "Don't give up," she'd written, as if she knew how close he was to doing exactly that. As if she could see through walls and distance to the part of him that whispered it would be easier to just surrender, to let Thornton win, to stop fighting against impossible odds. But easier wasn't the same as right, and somewhere in Denver, Eliza was fighting for him. The least he could do was fight for himself. The trial began exactly as Walsh had predicted, fast, brutal, and rigged from the start. Judge Whitmore was a portly man with cold eyes and a gavel he wielded like a weapon. The prosecutor was young, ambitious, and clearly being fed information by Thornton, who sat in the front row of the gallery like a king watching gladiators fight for his amusement. The charges were read: kidnapping of Catherine Thornton, theft of private documents, assault on security personnel, conspiracy to commit fraud. Each one carried years of prison time. Together, they could mean life. Nathaniel had no lawyer. He'd refused the public defender Whitmore offered, knowing the man would be either incompetent or compromised. Instead, he chose to represent himself, a decision that made Whitmore smile with satisfaction. "Mr. Cross," the judge said after the charges were read, "how do you plead?" "Not guilty on all counts." "Noted. Prosecutor, you may call your first witness." The prosecution's case was a masterwork of manufactured evidence. They called Morrison, who testified that he'd seen Nathaniel physically drag Catherine from a carriage in Cheyenne. They called the guards from the office building, who swore Nathaniel had been found with stolen documents in his possession. They called a banker who produced records showing Nathaniel had financial difficulties that might motivate desperate acts. Every word was a lie or a distortion, and every word went unchallenged because Nathaniel had no witnesses of his own, no evidence to present, no way to prove the truth. By the end of the first day, even Nathaniel could see how it looked. Guilty. Obviously, unquestionably guilty. That night in his cell, he sat with his head in his hands and tried to figure out what Sarah would have told him to do. She'd believed in truth, in justice, in the fundamental goodness of people, but she'd also been practical enough to know that sometimes good people lost. The door opened. Nathaniel looked up expecting Cooper, but instead found himself facing James Thornton himself. "You shouldn't be here," Nathaniel said. "I go where I please." Thornton gestured, and Cooper appeared behind him with a chair. The marshal set it down and retreated, leaving them alone. "I wanted to see you before the verdict comes in tomorrow. Wanted to watch you realize you've lost. The trial's not over. Please, we both know how this ends." Thornton sat, crossing his legs with casual elegance. "You'll be convicted, sentenced to 15, maybe 20 years, and while you rot in prison, I'll acquire your ranch through legal foreclosure. Your men will scatter. Your legacy will be forgotten. Everything you built will become mine. Catherine will testify against you. Catherine is my wife, and even if she weren't, who would believe her over me?" Thornton smiled. "I'm a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. She's a troubled woman with a history of melancholy. Any testimony she gives will be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable mind." "And the documents we stole? The proof of your fraud?" "What documents?" Thornton's smile widened. "I reported certain papers missing from my office, yes. But without those papers to examine, who can say what they contained? For all anyone knows, you destroyed them, burned them to hide your own crimes." It was brilliant in its simplicity. Thornton had created a narrative so airtight that truth couldn't penetrate it. And because he controlled the judge, the prosecutor, and half the witnesses, that narrative would become reality. "You're going to lose," Thornton said, standing, "and I wanted to be the one to tell you. Wanted to see it in your eyes when you understood that all your fighting, all your resistance, was pointless." He moved to the cell door and knocked for Cooper. "Goodbye, Cross. Enjoy your last night of hoping. Tomorrow, you'll have nothing left but regret." He left, and Nathaniel sat in the silence, feeling the walls close in. Thornton was right. The trial was rigged. The verdict was predetermined. There was no escape, no rescue, no miracle coming to save him. Unless Walsh had moved faster than anyone expected. The second day of trial began with Nathaniel's defense. He had no witnesses, no evidence, no strategy beyond telling the truth and hoping someone would listen. He stood before the court and laid out everything: Thornton's threats, the systematic land acquisition, Catherine's desperate escape, the letters that proved Sarah had loved him and he'd failed her. The prosecutor objected constantly. Whitmore sustained every objection. And Thornton sat in the gallery, smiling. Then, just as Nathaniel was preparing to rest his case and accept defeat, the courtroom doors burst open. Daniel Walsh strode in, followed by 6 federal marshals and a man in a colonel's uniform that marked him as U.S. Army. "Your Honor," Walsh said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent room, I'm Federal Marshal Daniel Walsh, and I have warrants for the arrest of James Thornton on charges of fraud, bribery, illegal land acquisition, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Whitmore banged his gavel, shouting for order. Thornton stood, his face gone white, and Nathaniel felt something uncurl in his chest that might have been hope. "This is outrageous," Whitmore bellowed. "This court is in session. You cannot—" "I can and I am." Walsh produced a document sealed with an official stamp. These warrants were issued by Federal Judge Harrison in Denver and countersigned by the territorial governor. They supersede any local authority, including yours. Whitmore snatched the document and read it, his face purpling. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular is conducting a trial where the victim of the alleged kidnapping is begging not to be returned to her husband, where the supposedly stolen documents prove massive criminal fraud by the complainant, and where the judge has clear financial ties to the man bringing charges." Walsh turned to face the gallery. "Mr. Thornton, you're under arrest. Come peacefully or be taken by force." Thornton didn't move. His eyes were fixed on Walsh with pure hatred. "You would betray your own family?" "You stopped being my family the day you raised your hand to my sister." Walsh nodded to his marshals. "Take him." They moved forward, but Thornton was faster. He drew a pistol from his coat and pointed it not at Walsh, not at the marshals, but at Nathaniel. "You did this," Thornton said, his voice shaking with rage. "You destroyed everything. My business, my marriage, my reputation. You took it all." "I took nothing you didn't try to take from me first," Nathaniel said quietly. "Then we'll go down together." Thornton's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow. Nathaniel saw the barrel, saw Thornton's hand, saw death coming, and felt strangely calm about it. Then someone tackled Thornton from the side, driving him to the ground. The gun discharged, the bullet punching a hole in the ceiling. And when the smoke cleared, Nathaniel saw Catherine Thornton standing over her husband, breathing hard, her eyes blazing. "No," she said. "You don't get to hurt anyone else, not ever again." The marshals swarmed Thornton, disarming and shackling him. He fought like a wild animal, screaming threats and accusations, but they dragged him away regardless. His voice echoed through the courthouse until distance finally swallowed it. Whitmore sat in stunned silence. The prosecutor had gone pale, and Nathaniel stood in the defendant's box, trying to process what had just happened. Walsh approached him. "The charges against you are dismissed. All of them. The evidence against Thornton is overwhelming, and Catherine's testimony will ensure he never sees the outside of a prison cell again." "It's over?" "It's over." Walsh extended his hand. "You're a free man, Mr. Cross. And if I'm any judge, you're about to become a wealthy one. Thornton's assets will be seized and auctioned. Some of it will go to his victims, people he's defrauded over the years. But the land he acquired illegally? That reverts to its rightful owners, including several parcels that border your ranch." Nathaniel shook his hand, still feeling dazed. "I need to see Eliza." Walsh smiled. "She's waiting outside. Has been since yesterday, but I wouldn't let her in until I knew the trial was resolved. She was not happy about it." "I imagine not." "She's a remarkable woman, Mr. Cross. My sister speaks very highly of her, says she saved their lives in the mountains." "She seems to make a habit of saving lives," Nathaniel said, "including mine." He walked out of the courtroom a free man for the first time in days. The late afternoon sun hit him like a blessing, warm despite the winter cold. And there, standing on the courthouse steps with her arms crossed and her face fierce, was Eliza. She didn't run to him, didn't throw herself into his arms or weep with relief. She just stood there, waiting, letting him come to her. When he reached her, Nathaniel stopped. There was so much he wanted to say. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you." But the words tangled in his throat, inadequate to the moment. So instead, he did what Eliza had done in Thornton's office. He pulled her close and kissed her. This kiss was different from that first one. Slower, deeper, full of promises instead of desperation. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them and the choice they were making. When they finally broke apart, Eliza was smiling. "It's about time. I'm a slow learner. I've noticed. She touched his face, gentle despite her calloused fingers. But you get there eventually. I read Sarah's letters, all of them. I know. She told me to choose love, to choose it actively, deliberately, instead of just letting it happen to me. Nathaniel caught Eliza's hand and held it against his cheek. I'm choosing, Eliza. I'm choosing you, if you'll have me. Have you? She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Nathaniel, I walked 8 hours through a blizzard, stole documents from a powerful criminal, rode through mountain passes in a snowstorm, and sat outside a courthouse for 2 days waiting to see if you'd be convicted or freed. You think I did all that just to walk away now? I think you're the bravest person I've ever met, and I think I don't deserve you. You're right, you don't. She pulled her hand free and laced her fingers through his instead. But you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to, and that's enough. They walked back to the boarding house together as the sun set, painting Cheyenne in shades of gold and amber. Catherine was waiting there, along with Marcus and Tom, who'd ridden in that morning after hearing about the trial. Boss, Tom grinned when he saw them. We heard Thornton got arrested. Is it true? It's true. He'll be standing trial himself soon enough. Nathaniel looked around the small room at these people who'd risked everything for him. I owe all of you more than I can ever repay. You gave us a home when no one else would, Marcus said. We're just returning the favor. Still, I want you to know, Nathaniel paused, trying to find the right words. I want you to know that I see what you did, and I won't forget it. We know, Tom said simply. That's why we did it. They stayed in Cheyenne for another week while Walsh finalized his case against Thornton. The trial was swift and brutal. Catherine testified about years of control and abuse, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. Other victims came forward. Business partners Thornton had cheated, competitors he'd destroyed, people whose lives he'd ruined in his pursuit of power. The documents Nathaniel had stolen proved everything. Shell companies, falsified deeds, bribes documented in Thornton's own handwriting. It was damning and irrefutable. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Thornton would spend the next 30 years in a federal prison, assuming he lived that long. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized, his name forever synonymous with corruption. Catherine filed for divorce the same day. It was granted within the week, giving her back her maiden name and her freedom. She decided to stay in Denver, close to her brother, and start a new life far from the shadow of the man who'd controlled her for so long. Thank you, she told Nathaniel the night before he left for home, for giving me the courage to run, for protecting me when you had every reason to save yourself instead. You saved yourself, Nathaniel corrected. We just helped clear the path. Then thank you for that. She looked at Eliza, standing beside Nathaniel with her hand in his. Take care of him. He needs someone who won't let him retreat into his walls again. I don't plan to let him retreat anywhere, Eliza said. Except maybe to bed at reasonable hours. He's terrible about sleep. Catherine laughed, really laughed, free and unguarded, and Nathaniel realized it was probably the first genuine laugh she'd had in years. The ride back to the ranch took 3 days through melting snow and early spring mud. The temperature had risen just enough to turn winter into a messy transition season, where everything was wet and cold and beautiful in its own miserable way. Nathaniel and Eliza rode side by side, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, comfortable with each other in a way that felt both new and ancient. She told him about her childhood in Montana, about losing the ranch when her father's health failed, about the years of drifting and survival that had led her to that prison cell in Denver. He told her about building the ranch, about his parents' deaths, about the loneliness that had driven him to accept his aunt's parade of prospective brides, even though he knew he'd reject them all. I was looking for someone perfect, he admitted, someone who couldn't hurt me because they'd be too perfect to be real. It was safer than risking real connection. And how did that work out for you? Terribly. 23 rejections and a lifetime of regret. He glanced at her. Then you showed up, and you weren't perfect at all. You were prickly and stubborn, and you'd just gotten out of prison for assault. Are you complaining? I'm saying you were exactly what I needed. Real. Honest. Unwilling to let me hide. He reached over and took her hand. You saw me, Eliza. The broken parts I tried to hide. And you stayed anyway. Of course I stayed. The broken parts are the most interesting. She squeezed his hand. Besides, you saw me too. The anger, the violence, the mistakes I've made. And you gave me a job anyway. Best decision I ever made. Second best, she corrected. The best one was choosing to fight instead of surrender. That's when I knew you'd be worth keeping. They reached the ranch on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The place looked exactly as Nathaniel had left it. Same buildings, same fences, same land stretching to the horizon. But somehow it felt different, warmer, more like a home and less like a fortress. Marcus and the other men who'd stayed behind came out to greet them, cheering and clapping Nathaniel on the back. Billy had returned safely from his northern run, as had the groups that had ridden south and east. Everyone had made it through Thornton's pursuit unscathed. That night they gathered in the main house for the first time since Nathaniel had inherited it. He'd never entertained before, never opened his doors to anyone. But now the dining room was full of his men, passing plates and bottles, telling stories, laughing. Tom raised his glass. To the boss, for being too stubborn to quit and too decent to compromise. To freedom, Marcus added, and the people brave enough to fight for it. To second chances, Billy said, looking around the table. And the family we choose instead of the family we're born with. They drank, and Nathaniel felt something settle in his chest. These people, rough, scarred, imperfect, were his family. This place was his home. And for the first time in years, that was enough. After dinner, he and Eliza walked out to the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. What happens now? Eliza asked. Now we rebuild. Expand the herd, fix the things that need fixing, maybe buy some of that land Thornton was forced to sell off. Nathaniel put his arm around her shoulders. And I was thinking maybe we should make this arrangement official. What arrangement? The one where you work for me, where you live here and help run this place and put up with my tendency to brood. That doesn't sound very romantic. You're right. Nathaniel turned to face her fully. Let me try again. Eliza Hart, you walked into my life in the middle of a blizzard and turned everything upside down. You challenged me, protected me, saved me in more ways than I can count. And I know I'm broken and difficult and not nearly good enough for you. But I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled that smile he'd come to love, fierce and warm and absolutely genuine. On one condition. Name it. We do this as partners, equal partners. Your ranch becomes our ranch. Your decisions become our decisions. No walls, no hiding, no retreating into silence when things get hard. I can do that. He paused. I want to do that. Then yes, Nathaniel Cross, I'll marry you. She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like whiskey and promise. But I'm keeping my own horse and my rifle and the right to beat the hell out of anyone who tries to hurt the people I love. I wouldn't expect anything less. They were married a month later in the same church where they'd met with Catherine. It was a small ceremony, just Marcus and Tom as witnesses, Catherine and her brother traveling from Denver to attend, and a handful of ranch hands who cleaned up surprisingly well in borrowed suits. Eliza wore a simple dress the color of storm clouds, with her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and dangerous and entirely herself, and when she took Nathaniel's hand, he felt the last of his walls crumble completely. The minister asked if they would love and honor each other, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. They both said yes, and Nathaniel meant it with every broken piece of his heart. The ranch prospered over the next year. With Thornton gone, the railroad route was renegotiated by more honest men, creating new markets for cattle and bringing fair prices to ranchers throughout the territory. Nathaniel's herd grew, his land expanded, and his reputation shifted from that of a suspicious recluse to a respected businessman. But more importantly, his life expanded. He and Eliza worked side by side, partners in every sense. She proved as skilled at managing accounts as she was at breaking horses, and the ranch hands respected her as much as they respected Nathaniel. Maybe more, since she was less likely to brood and more likely to join them for cards after dinner. They fought sometimes, both too stubborn and too scarred to avoid conflict entirely. But they fought fair, with words instead of silence, and they always made up before sleep claimed them. 1 year to the day after Eliza had walked out of the blizzard, Nathaniel stood in his study holding a letter that had just arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the return address in Boston. He opened it carefully and read, "My dear nephew," it began, "I have heard the most extraordinary rumors about your recent marriage to a woman of questionable background and considerable courage. I am choosing to believe these rumors are true, as they suggest you have finally stopped hiding from life and started living it." Enclosed. Please find a small wedding gift, the deed to a property in town that might serve as a home base for your new wife's business ventures, should she wish to establish any. I am told she is talented at metalwork. Perhaps a forge would be appropriate? Your loving aunt, Margaret. Nathaniel laughed and showed the letter to Eliza, who'd just come in from the stable. Your aunt bought me a forge? Apparently she approves of you, which is a first. What do you think? Eliza took the letter and read it again. Should I open a smithy in town, take commissions, teach the trade, maybe hire some of the local women who need work? I think you should do whatever makes you happy. Nathaniel pulled her close. This ranch is just a place, Eliza. You're what makes it a home. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. Give me time. I'm still learning. You're doing fine. She kissed him, slow and sweet. Better than fine, actually. That night, as they lay in bed together, Nathaniel thought about Sarah's letter. Choose love, she'd written. Choose it deliberately, actively, every single day. He'd chosen. And in choosing, he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever. Not just love, but trust. Partnership. The courage to be vulnerable with another person and believe they wouldn't use that vulnerability as a weapon. Eliza stirred beside him, mumbling something in her sleep about stubborn horses and reasonable people. He smiled and pulled her closer, feeling her breath warm against his neck. Outside, wind rattled the windows and snow began to fall. Another Wyoming winter settling in. But inside this room, in this bed, with this woman who'd refused everything he'd offered except honesty, Nathaniel was warm. He was home. And he was finally, impossibly, completely free. Years later, when people asked how Nathaniel Cross had gone from rejecting 23 brides to building a marriage that lasted 50 years, he always told them the same thing. I stopped looking for someone perfect, he'd say, and I started appreciating someone real. And Eliza, sitting beside him with silver in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes, would add, and I stopped running from broken things and learned to build with them instead. Together, they'd built a life. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and warm and worth every risk they'd taken. The ranch stood strong for generations, passed down through children and grandchildren who grew up hearing stories about the winter a stranger appeared in a blizzard and changed everything. About the man who'd built walls to protect his heart, and the woman who'd torn them down with patience and courage, and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than truth. About choosing love when fear seemed safer. About fighting for what mattered, even when the odds were impossible. About the fact that broken doesn't mean worthless. It just means you've survived. And survival, they learned, was just the beginning. The rest was living.